One morning on my way to my son's law office, I helped an older man on the bus. When I got off, he followed me and asked if he could come along to the office. When we arrived, the moment my son saw him, his face went pale. That old man was not who he appeared to be. But before I tell you who he was and how he changed my life, let me tell you how my own son tried to throw me away like yesterday's trash. My name is Otis King. I am 72 years old and I spent 30 years fighting fires in Detroit. I have carried children out of burning buildings and I have seen good men die. But nothing prepared me for the fire that would burn down my own family. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand tall when people tried to make you feel small. It started at 6 in the morning. My arthritis was flaring up in my knees, a reminder of years climbing ladders and kicking down doors. I shuffled out of this guest bedroom of my son Dante's penthouse. I needed to sit down. I needed my chair. It was a wingback leather armchair, cracked and worn in places the color of dark chocolate. My wife Bessie and I bought that chair 40 years ago with the overtime money I made working double shifts during the riots. It was the only thing I brought with me when I moved into this glass tower. It was the only thing in this cold, sterile apartment that felt like home. I walked into the living room and my heart stopped. The corner by the window was empty. The rectangular patch of carpet where my chair had stood for 3 months was lighter than the rest of the floor. It looked like a scar. Panic rose in my chest, tighter than smoke inhalation. I didn't call out. I knew. I just knew. I ran to the service elevator, ignoring the sharp pain shooting through my legs. I punched the button for the basement. The ride down felt like it took a lifetime. My hands were shaking not from age, but from rage. When the doors opened, the smell of the garbage room hit me. It didn't smell like the trash back in my old neighborhood. Even the trash here smelled expensive, like stale espresso and lilies. And there it was, sitting next to the massive metal recycling bin. My chair, Bessie's chair. It was tipped on its side like a dead animal. I rushed over and grabbed the armrest. The leather was cold. I ran my thumb over the scratch marks on the left side where our old cat Smokey used to sharpen his claws. I pressed my face against the headrest. If I closed my eyes and breathed deep enough, I could still smell a faint hint of lavender. Bessie's perfume. She died in this chair. She took her last breath holding my hand right here. And they threw it out. Otis, what are you doing down here? The voice was sharp and annoyed. I looked up. Brittany, my daughter-in-law, was standing by the elevator. She was wearing her yoga clothes, holding a green smoothie, looking at me like I was a stain on her pristine white carpet. You threw it out, I said. My voice was low. It was the voice I used to use when I had to give orders in a blaze. It was ruining the aesthetic, Otis, Brittany said, sipping her smoothie. We are having the partners over for cocktails tonight. That thing smells like a thrift store. It is full of dust mites, and honestly, it is an eyesore. I told the cleaners to take it down last night. It is not an eyesore, I said, standing up. My knees popped, but I stood tall. I am 6'2". I might be old, but I am still a man. That is my property. It is the only thing I have left of my wife. Brittany rolled her eyes. Oh God, here comes the melodrama. Look, we bought you that Italian recliner. It has a massage function. It cost $5,000. Be grateful. Now come upstairs and shower. You smell like garbage. I am taking it back up, I said. I grabbed the chair, trying to heave it upright. It was heavy, heavier than I remembered. Or maybe I was just weaker. No, you are not, Brittany snapped. She took a step back as if I was contagious. I have already called maintenance. The truck is coming in 20 minutes to haul it to the dump. Leave it alone, Otis. I ignored her. I wrapped my arms around the leather. I gritted my teeth. I was going to lift this chair if it was the last thing I did. I managed to get it off the ground an inch. My back screamed. Put it down, Dad. I froze. That was Dante, my son. The boy I raised on a firefighter's salary. The boy I taught to tie his shoes. The boy whose law school tuition I paid for by selling my own house. He stepped out of the elevator. He looked like $1 million, literally. His navy blue suit was tailored to perfection. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He looked at me hugging a piece of garbage, and he didn't look angry. He looked ashamed. Dante, help me, I said. I was panting. Tell her. Tell her this is where your mother used to read to you. Tell her. Dante sighed. He checked his Rolex. Dad, Brittany is right. It doesn't fit the apartment. We are trying to maintain a certain image here. You know that. Image, I spat the word out. You care more about image than your own mother. Stop it, Dante said sharply. His face hardened. He walked over to me, but he didn't help me lift the chair. He put a hand on my shoulder and pushed down, gently forcing me to drop it. The chair hit the concrete with a thud that echoed in my hollow chest. Let it go, Dad. It is just a chair. We have a big day today. Do not ruin it. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes. He wasn't afraid of losing the chair. He was afraid of being associated with it. Associated with the poverty we came from. Associated with me. Go get cleaned up, Dante said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. He didn't look at me. He looked at the wall. I have a meeting with the client, so I cannot drive you. Here. He extended his hand. In his manicured fingers was a plastic bus pass and a $20 bill. Take the number 42 bus to the city center, Dante said. Meet me at the office at 10 o'clock sharp. We need to sign those papers for the retirement community. The deposit is due today. And Dad, please do not be late, and do not take a cab. It is a waste of money. The bus stops right in front of my building. I looked at the $20. Then I looked at the bus pass. Then I looked at my chair lying on the dirty floor. A retirement community. That was a fancy word for a nursing home. They were kicking me out. First my chair, then me. They were scrubbing their lives clean of everything that wasn't shiny and new. I wanted to punch him. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. I learned a long time ago that fire needs oxygen to burn. If you starve it, it dies. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of my anger. Not yet. I reached out and took the money. My calloused fingers brushed against his soft, smooth hand. He flinched. Fine, I said. My voice was calm. Too calm. I will take the bus. Dante looked relieved. Good. See you at 10. And Dad, wear the suit I bought you, not your old one. He turned and walked back to the elevator with Brittany. She whispered something to him, and he nodded, laughing softly. The doors closed, and I was left alone in the silence of the basement. I looked down at my chair one last time. I knelt and kissed the leather headrest. I promise you, Bessie, I whispered. I am not going to let them win. I walked out of the service entrance into the bright morning sun. The air was cold, but it felt good to be out of that glass prison. I clutched the crumpled $20 bill in my fist. Dante thought he was sending a senile old man on a bus ride to his final resting place. He thought he was solving a problem. He had no idea he was starting a war. I walked to the bus stop, my back straight despite the pain. I waited for the number 42. I didn't know it then, but that bus ride was about to bring me face to face with destiny. I stood there watching the traffic, thinking about the papers they wanted me to sign. They wanted my power of attorney. They wanted the last of my savings. The bus pulled up screeching to a halt. The doors hissed open. I stepped up. The driver didn't look at me. I scanned the seats. And that is when I saw him. The man who would help me teach my son the hardest lesson of his life. But at that moment, he just looked like another forgotten soul in a city that didn't care. I paid my fare and moved down the aisle. The game was on, and Otis King was done playing by their rules. The number 42 bus did not glide like the silent high-speed elevators in Dante's luxury building. It heaved and shuddered like a dying beast. When the doors hissed open, I stepped up, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a thick cocktail of diesel fumes, stale coffee, and the sour sweat of hard labor. To my daughter-in-law, Brittany, this smell would have been a reason to burn her clothes. But to me, it smelled like life. It smelled like Detroit. It smelled like the 30 years I spent riding routes just like this one to the fire station before I could afford my first car. I moved down the narrow aisle, gripping the yellow handrails. My knees were throbbing in rhythm with the engine's vibration, but I kept my face blank. I found a seat near the back next to a young woman in scrubs who was asleep with her mouth slightly open. Across from her, a man with drywall dust in his hair stared blankly at his phone. These were the invisible people. The people who built the towers Dante lived in and cleaned the floors Brittany walked on. Sitting there in the suit Dante had bought me, I felt like an imposter. The fabric was too smooth, too expensive. It felt like a costume for a play I didn't want to be in. I stared out the window, watching the city transition from the manicured lawns of the suburbs to the cracked pavement of the inner city, and finally toward the gleaming steel of the financial district. The bus lurched to a halt at a stop near the old community center. The hydraulics hissed loudly, and the driver, a young man with a thick neck and impatient eyes, drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. That was when I saw him. He was waiting on the curb, a solitary figure wrapped in a coat, that had seen better decades, let alone days. He moved slow, painfully, slow. As he climbed the steps, I could see the tremor in his hands. He looked like a man who had been chewed up by the world and spat out on the side of the road. His gray beard was matted, and he carried a canvas bag that looked heavy with secrets. "Move it, Pops!" "I ain't got all day." The driver barked, his voice booming through the quiet bus. The old man flinched. He reached into his pocket, his fingers fumbling. And then disaster struck. His hand shook too hard and a handful of coins cascaded onto the metal floor. Cling, cling, clatter. The sound was sharp and agonizingly long. Nickel and dimes rolled everywhere. One quarter spun in a perfect circle before toppling over near the driver's boot. "Oh, for God's sake," the driver groaned, rolling his eyes. He didn't move to help. He just slammed his hand on the wheel. From the back of the bus, a group of 3 teenagers started laughing. It wasn't a joyful laugh. It was that cruel, predatory laugh of the young who haven't yet learned that time comes for us all. "Look at him," one of them sneered. "Drunk early today, ain't he?" The old man froze. He looked down at the scattered coins, and for a second I saw a look of pure devastation on his face. It wasn't about the money. It was about the dignity. He started to bend down his knees, shaking violently, trying to chase a dime that was rolling away. Something inside me snapped. It was the same feeling I used to get when I heard the alarm bell at the station, the heat rising in my chest, the instinct to move. I didn't think. I stood up. My arthritis screamed, but I ignored it. I drew myself up to my full height. 6'2". I might be 72 years old. I might have gray hair and a limp. But I spent 3 decades carrying grown men out of burning buildings. I have kicked down oak doors and held back collapsing beams. You don't lose that kind of strength. It just goes dormant. I walked to the front of the bus. My dress shoes clicked on the linoleum. The sound was heavy and authoritative. I didn't say a word. I just stopped right behind the old man. I looked at the teenagers. I didn't yell. I just gave them the look. The look I used to give rookies when they panicked in a smoke-filled room. The look that says silence is your only option right now. The laughter died instantly. The lead teenager looked down at his shoes, suddenly finding them very interesting. Then I turned my gaze to the driver. He was about to say something else to hurry the old man up, but the words died in his throat when he met my eyes. I held his gaze for 3 long seconds. Long enough for him to shift uncomfortably in his seat. Long enough for him to realize that he had made a mistake. I knelt down. It hurt like hell, but I didn't grunt. I started picking up the coins, one by one. The nickel under the seat, the dime near the door, the quarter by the driver's boot. I gathered them all into my large calloused palm. I stood up and gently took the old man's hand. His skin was like dry parchment paper, but underneath I felt a pulse that was strong and steady. I pressed his coins back into his palm, closing his fingers over them. "Keep your money, brother," I said softly. I pulled my own wallet from inside Dante's expensive suit jacket. I pulled out a $5 bill and slid it into the fare machine. "For both of us," I said to the driver. My voice was low and rough, like gravel mixing with cement. "And drive carefully." The driver nodded quickly, swallowing hard. He closed the doors without another word. I guided the old man to the seat next to mine. He sat down heavily, letting out a breath that sounded like air escaping a punctured tire. Up close, he smelled of old rain and cheap tobacco, but underneath that there was something else. The smell of old books, dust, and paper. We rode in silence for a few blocks. The bus was quiet now. No one was looking at their phones anymore. They were looking at us. "Thank you," the old man said. His voice surprised me. It wasn't the weak, trembling voice I expected. It was deep and resonant with a strange cadence to it, almost like he was used to speaking in large rooms. "You did not have to do that." I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the passing city. "Yes, I did." He turned his head slowly to study me. I could feel his eyes scanning my face, taking in the suit that didn't quite fit my spirit, the polished shoes and the weary set of my jaw. "You are wearing a suit that costs more than this bus," he observed quietly. "But you have hands that have worked harder than anyone on it." I looked at my hands. They were scarred and thick, with knuckles swollen from years of gripping hoses and axes. Dante hated my hands. He said they looked rough at dinner parties. "It is just a suit," I said. "A costume. My son wants me to look presentable while he signs my life away today." The old man hummed a low sound of understanding. He shifted his canvas bag, pulling it closer to his chest. "Why did you help me? Most men in suits like that, they do not see men like me. They look right through us." I turned to face him. His eyes were a startling shade of hazel, sharp and clear amidst the wrinkles of his face. There was an intelligence there that didn't match the ragged coat. "Because I know what it feels like to be invisible," I said. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated it. I live in a penthouse in the sky with my son. I have a view of the whole city, but in that house I am just furniture. I am just something that takes up space until I can be moved out. The old man nodded slowly. "Invisibility is a dangerous superpower, my friend. You see things others miss. You hear things others ignore, but it can eat your soul if you let it." I smiled a bitter, dry smile. "I guess that is why we are on the bus." "The Invisible Men Express." He chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Perhaps. Or perhaps we are just two travelers going to battle." "Battle?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He tapped the side of his canvas bag. "Everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Today, I am going to finish a war I started 30 years ago." I didn't ask what he meant. We all have our wars. I was heading to mine. A war against my own irrelevance. A war to keep my dignity in a sterile office where my son would explain why I was a burden. The automated voice of the bus announcer broke our silence. "Financial District. Union Tower." "That is me," I said, gripping the handrail to pull myself up. The dread settled in my stomach, heavy as lead. "That is me too," the old man said. I paused, looking down at him. "You are getting off here." He nodded, struggling to his feet. He gripped his bag tight. "Yes, I have an appointment." I hesitated. The Union Tower was the most exclusive building in the city. It was full of hedge funds, corporate law firms, and tech giants. It wasn't a place for men with matted beards and taped-up shoes. But I looked at his eyes again. There was no confusion there, only a steely determination. "Well," I said, gesturing to the door. "After you." We stepped off the bus together. The wind whipped around the base of the glass skyscrapers, swirling with dead leaves and discarded wrappers. The contrast was jarring. Above us, people were moving billions of dollars. Down here, we were just two old black men standing on the concrete. I expected him to turn toward the park or the subway entrance, but he didn't. He fell into step beside me, his limp pronounced, but his pace steady. "Are you following me?" I asked, not unkindly. He looked up at the towering glass spire of Dante's building. The sun reflected off the windows, making it look like a pillar of fire. "No," he said softly, adjusting his ragged collar. "I believe we are just walking the same path." I sighed. I didn't have the heart to tell him he wouldn't get past the front door. I didn't have the heart to tell him that this world wasn't built for us anymore. "Come on then," I said. "Walk with me. But do not expect a warm welcome." He smiled, a small, knowing smile that sent a shiver down my spine. "Oh, I do not expect a welcome, my friend. I expect a reckoning." And with that, we walked toward the revolving doors, unaware that the moment we stepped inside, everything I thought I knew about my son and my future was about to shatter into a million pieces. The revolving doors of the Union Tower did not just spin, they sliced the air. When I pushed through them, following the limping figure of Elijah, it felt like I was stepping into a different atmosphere. The air inside was conditioned to a crisp, sterile chill that smelled of expensive cologne and ozone. The floor was a vast expanse of white marble polished to such a high sheen that I could see the reflection of the recessed lighting above like constellations in a frozen lake. And there, in the middle of that pristine white floor, was the first mark of my shame. A chunk of dried mud fell from the heel of my shoe. It made a gritty scraping sound as I stepped. It was the mud from the basement garbage room where I had wrestled with my wife's chair. In that cathedral of commerce, that speck of dirt looked like a gunshot wound. I tried to kick it aside, but it just smeared, leaving a brown streak on the perfection. Beside me, Elijah looked even worse. Under the bright, unforgiving lights of the lobby, his coat looked more like a rag than a garment. The dirt in his beard seemed to stand out in high definition. The people rushing past us, men in three-piece suits and women in heels that clicked like gunfire, gave us a wide berth. They didn't look at us. They looked around us. We were obstacles. We were debris that the janitorial staff had missed. We didn't make it 5 steps before the gatekeepers descended. 2 security guards stepped out from behind a massive semicircular desk. They were young, big, and wore uniforms that were trying too hard to look like police gear. The one in the lead, a man with a buzz cut and a neck as thick as a tree trunk, held up a hand. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He didn't ask if he could help us. He just made a stopping motion the way you would stop a stray dog from entering a restaurant. "Hold it right there, Pops," the guard said. His voice echoed slightly in the cavernous space. No soliciting, no loitering, and definitely no begging. The service entrance is around the back by the dumpster. That is where the shelter van picks up. I felt the heat rise in my neck, my hands balled into fists at my sides. "I am not a beggar," I said, my voice trembling slightly, not from fear but from the effort of holding back my temper. "I am here to see my son. He is a lawyer on the 42nd floor. Dante King." The guard scoffed. He looked me up and down, taking in the mud on my shoe, the slightly out-of-style cut of the suit Dante had bought me, and then he looked at Elijah. "Yeah, right." The guard laughed, and his partner smirked behind him. "And I am the King of England. Look, guys, I don't want to have to drag you out. Just turn around and go back to whatever bridge you crawled out from under." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My fingers felt clumsy and thick. I dialed Dante. It rang and rang and rang. Voicemail. I hung up and dialed the main line for his firm. A receptionist answered. "Connect me to Dante King," I said. "This is his father. Please hold." The music on hold was a light jazz that mocked my racing heart. The guards were stepping closer, their hands resting on their belts near their tasers. The people in the lobby were starting to stare. I could feel their judgment like a physical weight. Then the line clicked. It wasn't Dante. It was Brittany. "Otis," she said. Her voice wasn't just loud, it was piercing. And because I had pressed the phone hard against my ear in my panic, I accidentally hit the speaker button. Her voice exploded into the quiet lobby. "Otis, where are you?" "Dante is freaking out. He is in a meeting with the partners. Why are you calling the main line?" "I am downstairs," I said, trying to lower the volume, but my hands were shaking too much. "The guards won't let me up. They think I am a homeless person. Brittany, tell them who I am." There was a pause, a silence that felt heavy and cruel. Then Brittany laughed. A short, sharp sound. "Well, look at you, Otis. You probably look like one. Did you wipe your shoes after digging through the trash this morning? God, this is so embarrassing." "Brittany," I pleaded, "just tell them." "Look, I cannot have you coming through the main lobby looking like a charity case," she said. Her voice was crystal clear, echoing off the marble walls. The guards smiled, hearing exactly what they expected to hear. "Go around to the back. Use the freight elevator. It is the one they use for catering and trash removal. It is better for everyone. Do not make a scene, Otis. Just know your place." The line went dead. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, the phone still in my hand, the dial tone humming. I felt naked, stripped of my dignity in front of strangers. The guard with the buzz cut took a step forward, a smug smile plastered on his face. "You heard the lady," he said, reaching out to grab my arm. "Trash removal is around back. Know your place, old man." He touched me. He put his hand on the sleeve of my suit. And that was when the air in the room changed. It didn't come from me. It came from Elijah. The old man who had been standing silently beside me, clutching his canvas bag, suddenly moved. He didn't lunge. He didn't strike. He simply stepped between me and the guard. He planted his feet shoulder-width apart and raised his chin. The tremor in his hands vanished. The hunch in his back disappeared. He looked at the guard not with fear, but with the absolute icy authority of a judge passing a death sentence. "Remove your hand from his person," Elijah said. His voice was not loud, but it carried a resonance that stopped the guard cold. It was a voice that commanded attention. "Excuse me," the guard blinked, confused by the sudden shift. "I said, remove your hand," Elijah repeated. "And while you are at it, you might want to consult the Municipal Building Code Title 4. Chapter 9, Section 404, Paragraph B, regarding public access to commercial properties during business hours." The guard frowned, his hand hovering in the air. "What are you talking about, bum?" Elijah took a step forward, forcing the guard to take a step back. "That section states clearly that any commercial building with a public atrium or lobby that connects to a municipal transit hub must remain open and accessible to the general public regardless of appearance, race, or economic status between the hours of 6 a.m. and 8 p.m. Furthermore, denying access based on attire without a posted dress code visible from the exterior entrance constitutes a violation of the Civil Rights Act of Public Accommodation." The lobby went quiet. People stopped walking. The receptionist stopped typing. The guard looked at his partner, who shrugged, looking nervous. "You are interfering with security," the buzz-cut guard stammered, but his voice had lost its edge. "And you are interfering with a federal lawsuit waiting to happen," Elijah said calmly. He reached into his ragged coat pocket. "I suggest you call your supervisor. Or better yet, check the laminated card that I know you are required to carry in your breast pocket, which outlines the lobby protocols, the one you clearly haven't read." The guard turned red. He opened his mouth to shout, but then a voice came from behind the desk. It was the head of security, an older man with gray at his temples who had been watching the monitors. He hurried out, looking pale. "Stand down, Johnson," the older man barked at the guard. He looked at Elijah with a strange expression, a mix of confusion and recognition. He didn't know who Elijah was exactly, but he knew that homeless men didn't quote municipal codes with that kind of precision. "My apologies, gentlemen," the head of security said, smoothing his tie. "New recruit. Overzealous. You are welcome to wait for your party." Johnson, the young guard, looked like he had been slapped. "But boss, did you see his shoes? Did you hear the lady on the phone?" "Walk away," Johnson, the older man, hissed. Elijah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He just nodded once, a sharp, regal nod. "Thank you. We will wait by the elevators." We walked past the stunned guards. I looked at Elijah, my mouth slightly open. "Where did you learn that?" I whispered, as we stood before the polished gold doors of the elevator bank. Elijah adjusted his collar, his old self returning slightly as the adrenaline faded. "I read a lot of books, Otis. Libraries are free, and justice is in the details." I looked at him, and for the first time I realized that the man I had paid a bus fare for was carrying something much heavier than a canvas bag. He was carrying a mind that was a weapon. Just then a chime sounded, a soft musical ding that announced the arrival of the express elevator from the penthouse levels. The gold doors slid open smoothly, and there he was. Dante. He stormed out of the elevator looking like a thundercloud wrapped in silk. He was checking his watch, his face twisted in a mask of annoyance and embarrassment. He didn't see us at first. He was looking toward the security desk, ready to yell at someone for letting his father cause a scene. "Dad," Dante shouted, not caring who heard him. "What is wrong with you?" "Brittany told you to go to the back." "Do you have any idea how important this meeting is? You are embarrassing me. You are—" He turned his head. He saw me standing there with mud on my shoe. And then his eyes slid to the man standing next to me. Dante stopped mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. The blood drained from his face so fast it looked like someone had pulled a plug. His skin turned an ashy gray. He dropped the leather portfolio he was holding. It hit the marble floor with a loud slap that echoed through the silent lobby. His knees actually buckled, and he had to grab the wall to keep from falling. He stared at Elijah with eyes wide with terror, as if he were seeing a ghost, as if he were seeing his own death. Elijah simply looked back at him. He didn't say a word. He just raised one finger and tapped the side of his nose slowly. Dante's lips trembled. He whispered one word so soft I almost didn't hear it. "Sir." And in that moment, standing in the lobby of the tower my son thought he owned, I realized that the power had just shifted. The bus ride was over. The reckoning had begun. The silence that followed Dante's whisper was heavier than the marble pillars holding up the ceiling. For a moment, time itself seemed to freeze in that cold, sterile lobby. I watched my son closely. I have seen men afraid before. I have seen rookies freeze up when a ceiling collapses. I have seen arsonists tremble when the handcuffs click shut. But I had never seen a look of sheer primal terror on my own son's face until that moment. The color didn't just drain from his face, it vanished, leaving his skin the color of wet ash. His eyes, usually so arrogant and calculating, were fixed on Elijah's hand. Specifically, they were glued to the heavy gold signet ring on the old man's pinky finger. It was a ring I hadn't noticed before because it was half hidden by grime, but under the lobby lights, the crest was unmistakable. It was a lion holding a scale, the exact same symbol that was etched into the frosted glass of the main entrance doors. The symbol of the founder, the symbol of the ghost who built this empire. Dante's pupils dilated until his eyes were almost entirely black. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, cutting a track through his expensive foundation. His hands, which were usually steady when he signed eviction notices, began to shake violently. The leather portfolio he was holding slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor with a flat, loud slap that echoed like a gunshot. Papers spilled out, sliding across the polished floor, but Dante didn't even look at them. He couldn't look away from Elijah. I looked at Elijah, expecting him to say something to reveal himself, but the old man did nothing. He simply stood there, leaning on his bad leg, looking at Dante with an expression of mild curiosity mixed with profound disappointment. That silence was the most powerful weapon I had ever seen. It let Dante's imagination run wild, and right now my son's imagination was painting a picture of his own destruction. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Dante's head. He was connecting the dots and coming up with the only conclusion his ambitious mind could process. He thought this was a test. He thought the rumors were true that the reclusive founder Elijah Stone was known for testing his executives by posing as a commoner. Dante realized in a split second that he had just failed the test in the most spectacular way possible. He had let his security guards harass the owner of the building. He had let his wife mock the man who signed his paychecks. Panic is a funny thing. It makes some men fight and it makes some men flee. But for men like Dante, men who survive on manipulation, panic makes them perform. Dante swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He took a ragged breath, and then suddenly his entire demeanor snapped. The arrogance vanished, replaced by a desperate fawning humility that was painful to watch. He rushed forward, almost tripping over his own feet. "Sir," he stammered, his voice cracking an octave higher than usual. "Sir, I didn't recognize you. The lighting in here, it is terrible, absolutely terrible." He reached out as if to shake Elijah's hand, then pulled back, realizing his palms were sweating, then reached out again to hover awkwardly. He turned on his heel and screamed at the security guard, the same guard he had been ready to praise just seconds ago. "Johnson, what are you doing standing there, you idiot? Get away from them. Do you have any idea who this is?" Johnson blinked, confusion written all over his face. "But, Mr. King, you just said—" "I said nothing," Dante roared, cutting him off. "You are harassing our guests. These men they are VIPs. Look at the way you are treating them. Is this the image of the firm I try to cultivate? Is this the hospitality we show to distinguished elders?" Dante grabbed Elijah's arm, gently brushing imaginary dust off the sleeve of the filthy coat. He acted as if the coat was made of velvet, not rags. "Please forgive him, Sir Dante," said, his voice trembling. "He is new, incompetent. I will have him terminated immediately. Please do not judge the firm by the actions of a minimum wage employee. You know how hard it is to find good help these days." I watched this performance with my mouth slightly open. I had raised Dante to be respectful, but I hadn't raised him to be a snake. He was shedding his skin right in front of me. He wasn't apologizing because he was sorry. He was apologizing because he was terrified. He ignored me completely. His focus was entirely on the old man he had just tried to have thrown out. Dante looked at the spilled papers on the floor, then kicked them aside. "Leave it!" he snapped at the receptionist who had rushed over to help. "Just leave it." He turned back to us, a rictus of a smile plastered on his face. "Please, let us go upstairs. The lobby is so chaotic. My office is quiet. We can talk there. I have the good scotch. The 25-year-old single malt." He gestured frantically toward the express elevators, the golden doors that were reserved only for partners and top-tier clients. "Otis, please," Dante said, finally acknowledging me, but only as a prop in his play. Help our friend to the elevator." "Why didn't you tell me you were bringing such an important guest? You should have called my private line." I didn't say anything. I just caught Elijah's eye. The old man gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible wink. I stepped forward and took Elijah's arm, not because he needed help, but because I wanted to be close to the only honest thing in that room. We moved toward the elevators. Brittany, who had been standing by the wall scrolling through her phone, looked up. She saw the scene, and her face twisted in confusion and disgust. She didn't know who Elijah was. She just saw her husband bowing and scraping to a man who smelled like a dumpster. "Dante, what is going on?" she hissed, stepping into the elevator with us. "Why are we bringing them up in the executive lift? It is going to smell like wet dog in here for a week." The doors slid shut, sealing us in a box of gold and mirrors. The air was instantly thick with tension. The smell of Elijah's old coat clashed violently with Brittany's floral perfume. Brittany pulled a silk handkerchief from her purse and pressed it conspicuously to her nose, letting out a dramatic gagging noise. "Seriously, Dante, I think I am going to be sick. Can't they take the service elevator? Look at his shoes. He is tracking mud on the carpet." Dante didn't just look at her. He turned on her with a ferocity that made me flinch. He grabbed her upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh hard enough to leave a bruise. He pulled her close to him, his face inches from hers. "Shut up," he whispered. It was a sound like a snake hissing before a strike. Brittany's eyes went wide. "Dante, you are hurting me." Not another word, Dante snarled through clenched teeth, his eyes darting nervously to Elijah, who was watching the floor numbers change with calm interest. "You will put that handkerchief away. You will smile. And you will treat this man like he is the President of the United States. Do you understand me? If you say one more word about the smell or the mud, so help me God, Brittany, I will cancel your credit cards before we reach the 40th floor." Brittany froze. She had never seen Dante like this. She looked from him to Elijah, then back to Dante. She realized suddenly that the danger was real, even if she didn't understand the source. She slowly lowered the handkerchief. Her face was pale, a mask of shock and resentment, but she nodded. Dante let her go and smoothed his jacket, taking a deep, shaky breath. He turned back to us, his smile returning as if a switch had been flipped. "My apologies, gentlemen," Dante said, his voice dripping with synthetic charm. "My wife is she is not feeling well today. The altitude, you know." I stood in the corner of the elevator, leaning against the railing. I looked at my son. Really looked at him. I saw the sweat staining his collar. I saw the tremor in his hands. I saw a stranger. The boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee was gone. In his place was a man who would throw his own wife under the bus to save his own skin, just like he had tried to throw me away earlier that morning. But why? Why was he so afraid of this old man? I looked at Elijah. He was just standing there, humming a soft tune, watching the numbers climb. 20, 30, 40. What did Dante know that I didn't? The elevator slowed. The bell chimed, soft and musical. Dante clapped his hands together, a sound that was too loud in the small space. "Well, here we are," he announced, his voice booming with forced conviviality. "The top of the world." The golden doors slid open, revealing a panoramic view of the city skyline that took my breath away. But I wasn't looking at the view. I was looking at Dante, who gestured for us to exit with a bow that was almost comical. "Please come in," Dante said, sweat dripping down his nose. "Today I am going to treat you both to the best hospitality this firm has to offer. Breathtaking views, gourmet lunch, whatever you need. Just please come in." I stepped out onto the plush carpet of the penthouse floor. I felt like I was walking into a lion's den. But looking at Dante's trembling hands, I realized he wasn't the lion. He was the prey. And the hunter was limping right beside me. The doors to Dante's private office didn't just open, they glided apart with a silent pneumatic hush, revealing a room that smelled of leather mahogany and the kind of money that doesn't scream, but whispers. It was a glass cage hanging in the clouds. 3 walls were floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of the city that made the people down below look like ants. It was breathtaking, and it was terrifying. Standing there on the plush Persian rug, I felt dizzy, and it wasn't from the altitude. It was from the sudden vertigo of stepping into a world that my son had built, a world where I didn't fit. "Please sit," Dante urged, gesturing to a seating area that looked more like a showroom than a place to relax. The couches were white cream Italian leather, pristine and terrifyingly clean. I hesitated. I was still thinking about the mud on my shoe. I didn't want to leave a mark. But Elijah didn't hesitate. He limped straight over to the most expensive-looking chair, a high-backed velvet throne, and collapsed into it with a groan of relief, letting his dusty canvas bag slide onto the immaculate floor. Brittany made a sound in her throat like a strangled cat. She stared at the bag, then at the velvet chair, then at Dante. Her eyes were pleading, screaming silently for him to do something. But Dante just smiled a tight, painful grimace that didn't reach his eyes. "Make yourselves comfortable," Dante said, his voice a little too loud, a little too bright. "Can I get you anything? Water, coffee, scotch? I have the Macallan 25. We were saving it for a special occasion, but having distinguished guests here is occasion enough." He didn't wait for an answer. He rushed over to a crystal decanter on a sidebar, his hands moving with a nervous, frantic energy. The clink of crystal against glass rang out sharp in the quiet room. I sat down gingerly on the edge of the sofa, keeping my back straight. I watched my son. He was performing. That was the only word for it. He was moving around the room, adjusting blinds, moving coasters, offering bowls of imported nuts. He was trying to suffocate the awkwardness with hospitality. He ordered lunch over the intercom, demanding the most expensive seafood platter from the restaurant downstairs, demanding it be brought up immediately. "You know, Dad," Dante said, bringing over a heavy crystal glass filled with amber liquid. He placed it in my rough hand. "I don't say this enough, but I do everything for this family. All of this, the office, the hours, the stress, it is all for you, to make sure the name King means something in this city." He turned to Elijah, offering him a glass with both hands, bowing slightly. "For you, sir." Elijah took the glass. He held it up to the light, swirling the liquid. He sniffed it loudly, then took a sip that was more of a gulp. He smacked his lips. "Not bad," Elijah said, his voice raspy. "A little woody for my taste. I prefer something with a bit more bite, but it will do to wash down the dust of the road." Dante looked like he wanted to cry. "That bottle cost more than my first car," but he just nodded vigorously. "Of course. Of course. I can send someone down to get something else if you prefer." "No." Elijah waved a hand dismissively. He struggled to his feet, leaving the glass on a coaster that was made of polished agate. "I want to look around. I haven't been this high up in a long time." Elijah began to wander around the office. And that is when the real torture began. It was a masterclass in subtle agitation. Elijah walked with his exaggerated limp, trailing his fingers along every surface. He touched the mahogany desk, leaving faint smudges. He stopped in front of a modern art sculpture, a twisted piece of metal that looked like a car crash but probably cost $50,000. He tapped it with his fingernail. "Ting, ting." "Is this scrap metal?" Elijah asked loudly, looking at Brittany. "Did you run out of money for decorations and just bring something in from the junkyard?" Brittany turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "That is a heavy metal original," she hissed. "It represents the duality of man and machine. It is priceless." Elijah hummed, unimpressed. "It looks like a radiator from a '78 Buick. My cousin had one just like it in his backyard." He moved on. He stopped at the bookshelf, pulling out a leather-bound law book. He opened it, creating a small cloud of dust, then snapped it shut and shoved it back in upside down. I saw Dante flinch. Every instinct in his body was screaming to yell at this dirty old man destroying his sanctuary. But the fear was stronger. The fear of that ring on Elijah's finger kept Dante paralyzed. "Otis, look at this," Elijah called out, pointing to a framed diploma on the wall. "Harvard Law. Very impressive. Did you pay for this?" I sat there clutching my drink, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "Yes," I said softly. "I worked double shifts. I sold the house on Maple Street." Elijah nodded, turning to look at Dante, who was sweating profusely now. "A good investment, it seems. Look at this office. Look at the view. A man doesn't get this high without standing on someone's shoulders." Dante cleared his throat loudly. He couldn't take the small talk anymore. He couldn't take the wandering. He needed to regain control. He needed to get what he wanted and get these people out of his office before he exploded. "Please sit down," Sir Dante said, guiding Elijah back to the chair. "Lunch will be here soon. Here. But while we wait, Dad and I have a little bit of administrative work to handle. Boring stuff, really. Just crossing the T's and dotting the I's." He walked behind his massive desk and pulled out a thick folder. It was the same folder he had dropped in the lobby. He opened it and smoothed out the papers. He clicked a heavy gold pen and walked over to me. "Dad," Dante said, kneeling in front of me so he was at my eye level. He put on his best lawyer face. The face of concern. The face of trust. "This is the paperwork for the community." Dante said, his voice dropping to a soothing whisper. "It is just standard liability forms and insurance waivers. You know how these places are. They need to know that if you fall or get sick, they have the authority to make medical decisions for you so they don't have to wait. It is for your safety." I looked at the paper. The text was small, dense, blocks of legal jargon that looked like a foreign language. And this one, Dante flipped to the next page, his hand covering the header text. "This is just to authorize the management of your assets to cover the monthly fees. It allows me to access the accounts directly so you don't have to worry about writing checks. You can just relax, Dad. You have worked hard enough. Let me take the burden now." Burden. That word hung in the air. I looked at his face. He looked sincere. He looked like the boy I used to read bedtime stories to. But then I looked at his eyes. They were shifting, darting back and forth, avoiding mine. I took the pen. It was heavy, cold. Brittany was watching from the window, her arms crossed. She had stopped looking angry and started looking hungry. She was watching that pen like a hawk watches a field mouse. "Just sign at the bottom," Dad Dante said, tapping the X with his finger. "Right there. And then we can eat. We can celebrate." I hesitated. My gut was screaming at me. It was the same feeling I got before a roof collapsed. The feeling that the structure wasn't sound. But what choice did I have? If I didn't sign, where would I go? I was tired. I was old. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was time to let go. I lowered the pen to the paper. The tip touched the line. Ink began to flow. Suddenly, a loud, hacking cough shattered the silence. It was Elijah. He was doubled over in the velvet chair, coughing violently, his whole body shaking. "Water," he gasped. "I need water!" Dante jumped up. "I need to get him water." But before Dante could move, Elijah reached out with a trembling hand to grab the glass of water on the table next to him. But he missed. His hand flailed wildly and swiped the crystal pitcher of water that had been sitting on the edge of the desk. The pitcher tipped. It happened in slow motion. The water cascaded over the edge of the table like a waterfall. It splashed onto the carpet and then surged forward, soaking the coffee table where I was writing. The papers. The water hit the document I was signing, instantly turning the ink into a blue blur. The paper soaked up the liquid, turning translucent and soggy. "Oh, Lord," Elijah wheezed, looking at the mess. "My clumsy old hands. I am so sorry. I tried to grab the water. I am so sorry." Dante stared at the ruined document. His face went red, then white, then red again. The vein in his forehead bulged. For a split second, the mask slipped. He looked at Elijah with pure, unadulterated hatred. He opened his mouth to scream, to curse, to throw us both out. But then Elijah looked up at him, and he wasn't coughing anymore. He was just looking, and he tapped that ring on his finger again. Tap, tap. Dante swallowed his rage. He choked it down until he almost gagged. "It is okay," Dante squeaked. It is just water." Accidents happen. Brittany let out a scream of frustration. She stomped her foot like a child. "Are you kidding me, Dante? Look at the carpet. That is Persian silk. And the papers." "Those were the originals." Dante turned to her, his eyes wide and frantic. "Quiet, Brittany. I can print them again. It is fine. I have the files on the server. I will just go print them again." He turned to me, forcing a smile that looked like a rictus of pain. "Don't worry, Dad. It will just take a few minutes. I will go to my assistant's desk and print a fresh copy. Why don't you help our friend dry off?" Dante grabbed the soggy mess of papers and practically ran out of the room. Brittany followed him, muttering curses under her breath, slamming the glass door behind her. The room went quiet again. The only sound was the dripping of water from the table to the rug. I looked at Elijah. He was sitting back in the chair, perfectly calm. He wasn't coughing. His hands weren't shaking. He pulled a dry handkerchief from his pocket and wiped a single drop of water from his lapel. "You didn't need water, did you?" I asked quietly. Elijah looked at me. His eyes were sharp, clear, and dangerous. "Read the fine print, Otis," he whispered, leaning forward. "While he is gone, read the fine print." That wasn't an insurance waiver, and that wasn't a management authorization. What was it, I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Elijah pointed to the wet trash can where Dante had dumped the ruined papers. "It was a deed of transfer," he said grimly. "He wasn't sending you to a home, Otis. He was taking your home. He was taking everything. He needed that signature to cover a debt that is bigger than this building. And now, you have about 5 minutes before he comes back with a fresh copy. Use them wisely." I stared at the closed door. The glass cage suddenly felt very small and very fragile. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the fire I needed to fight wasn't burning in a building. It was burning right here in my son's heart, and I was the fuel. The heavy glass door clicked shut, sealing the sound of Brittany's angry muttering outside, leaving me alone in the silent office with the dripping table and the strange old man who had just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life. The room felt different now. The air conditioning hummed with a menacing tone, and the panoramic view of the city no longer looked like an achievement, but like a precipice. I sat there staring at the soggy mess of papers. The water had soaked through the expensive bond paper, turning it translucent. The blue ink of my unfinished signature was bleeding outward, looking like a spreading bruise on flesh. I felt paralyzed. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that reminded me of the moments before a roof collapse. Elijah leaned forward. The facade of the clumsy, senile old man vanished instantly. He didn't look frail anymore. He looked sharp. He reached out with a finger that was steady as a rock and pointed to a block of dense text near the bottom of the page, right above where I had almost signed. The water had made the paper transparent enough that the bold text from the reverse side was visible, but it was the fine print on the front that Elijah wanted me to see. "Read it, Otis." Elijah whispered, his voice low and urgent. "Don't just look at it. Read it." Paragraph 4. Subsection B. I squinted. My reading glasses were in my pocket, but I didn't need them to see the betrayal. The water had washed away the polite formatting, revealing the jagged teeth of the contract. I leaned in closer, my nose filling with the smell of wet paper and stale trust. I read the words. Irrevocable transfer of deed. Power of attorney regarding all real estate and liquid assets. Assignment of pension benefits. I blinked, thinking I was misreading it. I wiped my eyes. I looked again. The words didn't change. "This isn't a medical release," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Keep reading," Elijah commanded. I moved my eyes down. "The grantor hereby relinquishes all rights to the property located at 452 Maple Avenue and grants the trustee full authority to liquidate said asset for the purpose of debt consolidation." Maple Avenue. My breath hitched in my throat. That wasn't just a house. That was the home where I raised him. That was the home where Bessie planted her hydrangeas. That was the home I had paid off 3 years early by working double shifts at the station and skipping lunch for a decade. It was currently rented out to a nice young couple, and that rental income was the only thing supplementing my pension. It was my safety net. It was the only thing standing between me and poverty. And he wasn't just putting me in a home, he was selling my home. He was taking the one thing I had left, the one thing I intended to leave to him in my will when I died naturally. But he couldn't wait. He wanted it now. He wanted to liquidate it, to sell my memories, to pay for his glass cage and his wife's designer bags. And the pension. I looked at the next line. Control of monthly disbursements. He wanted my firefighter's pension, the money I earned with my blood and my sweat and my lungs. I sat back in the leather sofa, feeling like I had been punched in the gut. The physical sensation was visceral. I felt nauseous. The room spun. He told me it was for the nursing home. I said, my voice sounding hollow and far away. He said it was just for the deposit. Elijah shook his head slowly, a look of profound pity in his eyes. He wasn't sending you to a community, Otis. Look at the fee structure. There is no allocation for care. He was going to dump you in a state-run facility, the kind that smells of urine and despair, and he was going to use your assets to cover his own tracks. He is drowning, Otis, and he decided to use you as a life raft. A life raft. The image burned into my mind. I looked at the wet paper again, and suddenly it wasn't a contract anymore. It was a movie screen playing the past. I saw Dante as a boy. I saw him sitting at the kitchen table on Maple Avenue, crying because he wanted the new Air Jordan sneakers that all the other kids had. I saw myself putting on my heavy turnout gear at 2 a.m, exhausted, my bones aching, kissing his sleeping forehead and going out into the snow to fight another fire just to earn the extra $50. I saw the burns on my arms. I remembered the smoke inhalation that sent me to the hospital for a week. I remembered eating peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so Dante could have steak. I remembered refinancing the house to pay for his law school tuition because he said he wanted to fight for justice. I sacrificed everything. I gave him the very marrow of my bones. I hollowed myself out so he could be full. And this was my repayment. He didn't see a father. He saw a piggy bank. He saw an asset to be liquidated. He looked at my hands, the hands that held him when he was sick, the hands that built his treehouse, and he didn't see love. He saw a signature that stood between him and financial ruin. The sadness began to evaporate. It boiled away in the heat of a rage so pure and so white-hot that it scared me. This wasn't the annoyance of a parent scolding a child. This was the wrath of a man who realizes his creation has become a monster. My hands stopped shaking. They curled into fists so tight my knuckles turned the color of old ivory. I stood up. My knees didn't hurt anymore. The arthritis was gone, burned away by the adrenaline. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. I looked at the reflection of the old man in the glass. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a firefighter standing before an arsonist. "They are coming back," Elijah said softly from his chair. "I can hear the elevator." I turned around. My face was stone. "Let them come," I said. The door slid open. Dante walked in first, holding a fresh, crisp folder. He was smiling that fake plastered smile again. Brittany followed him, looking bored, checking her nails. "Crisis averted," Dante announced, cheerfully waving the new documents. My assistant printed a fresh set, and I had her bring some sparkling water since we had a little spill. No harm done, right? He walked over to the desk, ignoring the wet mess on the coffee table. He placed the new folder down and uncapped a pen. "Okay, Dad, let's try this again," Dante said, his voice smooth as oil. "Just sign right here and we can get those oysters ordered. I am starving." He held the pen out to me. He looked at me, expecting the docile old man who dug through trash for a chair. He expected the father who always said yes. I walked over to the desk. I moved slowly, deliberately. I looked him right in the eye. Dante's smile faltered slightly. "Dad, is everything okay? You look intense." I looked at the pen. Then I looked at the document. Then I looked at Brittany, who was smirking by the window. I reached out and took the pen. Dante sighed in relief. "Great." Right there on the X. I held the pen in my fist like a dagger. I looked down at the paper. Irrevocable transfer. I didn't sign. Instead, I drove the pen down into the desk. I didn't write with it. I stabbed it. I slammed it down with so much force that the gold tip snapped and the plastic barrel shattered. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Dante jumped back, knocking over his chair. "Dad, what the hell?" I didn't let go of the broken pen. I stared at him, and for the first time in his life, he looked at me and saw the man who had walked through fire. "You think I am stupid," I said. My voice wasn't loud. It was a low rumble, like a building about to come down. "You think because I am old, because I limp, because I don't wear $5,000 suits that I can't read." Dante's eyes darted to the wet papers on the coffee table, then back to me. "Dad, I don't know what you are talking about. You are confused." "It is the stress." "I am not confused," I roared. I slammed my open hand down on the desk. The sound made Brittany scream and jump. I read it, Dante. I read every word. Maple Avenue, the pension, the liquidation clause. Dante went pale. He tried to laugh, but it came out as a choked wheeze. "Dad, listen, it is just legal language. It allows me to protect your assets. You are twisting it. Protect." I stepped around the desk. I advanced on him. He backed away until he hit the window. "Protect me from what?" "From living in my own home, from spending my own money." "You are robbing me," I said, spitting the words at him. "You brought me up here to this glass castle, gave me a drink, and tried to steal the last few years of my life. You tried to steal the house your mother died in." "Dad, please," Dante stammered, holding his hands up. "It is for the firm. I am in trouble. I am in. If I don't have the capital, I don't care about your firm." I shouted, my voice cracking with the weight of the betrayal. "I cared about you. I starved for you. I bled for you. And this is what you give me. You look at me and you don't see a father. You see a checkbook." I grabbed the fresh folder and ripped it in half. The sound of tearing paper was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. I threw the pieces in his face. "You aren't putting me in a nursing home," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "And you aren't touching a dime of my pension. You wanted me to sign. Well, consider this my resignation from being your victim." Dante looked at the torn paper raining down around him. He looked at Brittany, who was staring at me with open-mouthed horror, and then he looked past me at Elijah, who was sitting calmly in the velvet chair watching the judgment unfold. Dante's face hardened. The fear was replaced by the cornered ugliness of a rat. "Fine," he sneered, straightening his jacket. "You want to play it that way, old man? Fine. You don't want to sign? Then get out. Get out of my office. Get out of my penthouse. You can go back to the gutter for all I care. Let's see how long you last on the street with your precious dignity." I stood tall. I felt lighter than I had in years. "I would rather sleep in the gutter," I said, looking him dead in the eye, than spend one more night under a roof paid for by a son who sold his soul. I turned to leave, but I wasn't leaving alone. "Come on, Elijah," I said. "Let's go get a real drink." But before we could move, the intercom on the desk buzzed. It was a harsh, jarring sound. Mr. King, the receptionist's voice, crackled through the speaker, frantic and terrified. "The auditors are here, and the police. They are coming up." Dante's face went from angry to dead white in a heartbeat. He looked at the door, then he looked at Elijah. And for the first time, Elijah spoke up, his voice ringing with the authority of a gavel striking wood. "They aren't coming for your father, Dante," Elijah said, standing up. "They are coming for you, and I believe I have the evidence they are looking for right here in my bag." The silver serving cart rolled into the office with the silent precision of a hearse. A waiter in a white tuxedo jacket began placing dishes onto the mahogany conference table, transforming Dante's workspace into a five-star dining room. But to me, it didn't look like lunch. It looked like an obstacle course. There were too many forks. There were spoons with strange angles and knives that looked like surgical instruments. The linen napkins were so white and stiff I was afraid to touch them. I sat there staring at the spread. There were oysters on ice shimmering like cold mucus. There was a whole lobster, its red shell glistening with butter. There were things I couldn't even name, tiny appetizers topped with black fish eggs that looked like buckshot. I kept my hands in my lap. I was afraid that if I moved, I would knock over one of the 3 crystal glasses arranged in a perfect triangle in front of me. I looked at Dante. He was sweating again, wiping his forehead with a napkin, his eyes darting between me and Elijah. But it was Brittany who took center stage now. This was her battlefield. She sat up straighter, her spine rigid as a steel rod, and picked up a tiny fork with delicate manicured fingers. She looked at me, and her lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a smile full of pity and poison. "Otis," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Do you need help? I know this can be overwhelming for people who aren't used to fine dining. You see that small fork on the far left? The one with the 3 tines, that is for the oysters. Do not use the salad fork. That would be embarrassing." I reached for the fork she pointed at. My hand felt huge and clumsy. My fingers, which could tie a knot in a fire hose in pitch darkness, fumbled with the delicate silver. "Oops," Brittany giggled as the fork clattered against the plate. "Careful, Otis. That china costs more than your monthly pension check. Try not to break it." Dante cleared his throat. "Brittany, please. Dad is fine." Brittany ignored him. She sliced into a piece of foie gras. "I am just trying to help him, Dante. It is not his fault he doesn't know better. He spent his life eating out of lunchboxes and greasy diners. You can't expect someone from his background to understand the nuance of a proper table setting. It is like asking a dog to play the piano." I felt the heat rise in my neck. I looked at the food. I was hungry. My stomach was growling. But I couldn't eat. I felt like every bite I took would be judged. I felt like an intruder in a world where I didn't belong. I put the fork down. I decided I would rather starve than give her the satisfaction of watching me struggle. That was when Elijah moved. The old man had been watching Brittany with heavy-lidded eyes, looking like a tired old lion watching a yapping hyena. He reached out with a hand that was scarred and shaking, but he didn't reach for a fork. He didn't reach for a knife. He reached right into the center of the platter and grabbed a giant lobster tail with his bare hand. Butter dripped from the shell onto the polished table. Brittany gasped, dropping her knife. It made a loud clatter on the china. Elijah didn't even blink. He brought the lobster to his mouth and took a massive bite shell and all cracking it open with his teeth. He chewed loudly. He sucked the juice from the meat, making a slurping sound that echoed in the silent room. "Mmm," Elijah groaned, wiping butter from his beard with the back of his hand. "Now that is flavor. You can't taste the ocean if you put a piece of metal between you and the food." Brittany looked like she was going to be sick. Her face turned a pale shade of green. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. "You are eating like an animal. Use the crackers. Use the pick." "That is disgusting." Elijah laughed, a deep rasping sound that came from his belly. "Disgusting. Madam, back in Alabama where I grew up, we didn't have silver forks. We had the earth and we had our hands. When my mama grilled corn over the fire, we didn't cut it off the cob. We ate it hot enough to burn our lips, and we licked our fingers clean because wasting even a drop of butter was a sin." He looked at me. His eyes were twinkling. "Remember that, Otis? Remember the summer block parties? Remember the ribs? Did we use a knife and fork for ribs?" I looked at Elijah. Then I looked at the lobster claw on my plate. I remembered the backyard barbecues on Maple Avenue. I remembered Bessie laughing with sauce on her cheek. I remembered the feeling of community, of family, of food that was made with love, not just money. No, I said softly. We used our hands. I reached out. I bypassed the tiny fork. I bypassed the silver knife. I grabbed the lobster claw. It was warm and greasy. It felt real. I cracked it open with my hands, snapping the shell. I dipped the meat into the butter bowl and took a bite. It was delicious, and looking at Brittany's horrified face made it taste even better. "Oh my God," Brittany cried, pushing her chair back. "This is a nightmare. Dante, do something. They are ruining lunch. They are getting grease everywhere. Look at them. They are savages." Elijah grabbed a handful of fries and shoved them into his mouth. "Savages," he mused, chewing thoughtfully. "That is an interesting word. I think the real savagery is caring more about a tablecloth than a guest's hunger." Dante slammed his hand on the table. The water glasses jumped. "Enough," Dante shouted. His face was red and sweat was pouring down his temples. "Brittany, shut up. Just shut up and eat. And you—" He pointed a shaking finger at Elijah. "Please, just eat however you want. Just get it over with." Dante was unraveling. I could see it. He was terrified that Elijah was going to walk out. He was terrified of the ring on the old man's finger. He was terrified of me not signing the papers. He was a man trying to hold back a landslide with an umbrella. But Brittany wasn't used to being told to shut up. She stood up, throwing her napkin onto her plate. "I will not shut up," she screamed. "I am your wife, Dante. I am the one who introduced you to this world. I am the one who taught you how to dress, how to speak, how to eat. Without me, you would be just like them. You would be eating with your hands in some ghetto kitchen. I will not sit here and be humiliated by these hobos." The room went deadly silent. The word hung in the air. Ghetto. I stopped chewing. I slowly put the lobster claw down. I wiped my hands on the white linen napkin, leaving big orange stains. I looked at my son, waiting for him to defend me, waiting for him to tell her to leave. Dante looked at Brittany, then he looked at me, then he looked at Elijah. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He was paralyzed by his ambition. He couldn't defend me because he needed her connections. He was a coward wrapped in an Italian suit. Elijah stopped eating. He didn't look angry. He looked sad. "You poor child," Elijah said to Brittany. "You think the fork makes you civilized. You think the money makes you clean. But inside you are starving. You are starving for attention, and you are starving for a soul." Brittany let out a screech of rage. "Get out! Get out of my husband's office. I am calling security right now. I don't care who you think you are." She reached for the phone on the desk. Dante lunged for her. "No, Brittany, don't touch that." They wrestled for the phone. It was pathetic. A husband and wife fighting like children over a toy while their empire crumbled around them. And then suddenly, there was a knock at the door. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a rapid, urgent pounding. The fighting stopped. Brittany froze with her hand on the receiver. Dante looked at the door, his eyes wide with panic. "Come in," Dante croaked, his voice trembling. The heavy door swung open. It was Sarah, Dante's personal assistant. She was a young woman who usually looked like she was made of ice, efficient and emotionless. But right now she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her face was as white as the napkins on the table. She was holding a tablet against her chest, her knuckles white. "Mr. King," she whispered, and her voice broke. "What is it?" Sarah, Dante snapped, trying to regain his composure. "Can't you see we are in the middle of lunch?" Sarah didn't move. She didn't apologize. She just stood there trembling. "Sir, you need to check your email right now." Dante frowned. "What are you talking about?" "It is headquarters," Sarah said, and tears began to well up in her eyes. "The auditors. They aren't just sending an email, sir. They are in the building." Dante felt for the edge of the desk to steady himself. "What do you mean in the building? They are in New York. They are supposed to be in New York." "No, sir." Sarah shook her head. "They took the corporate jet this morning. They just walked past reception. There are 6 of them. And, sir—" She swallowed hard, looking at Dante with a mixture of pity and fear. "They have the police with them. They are coming up the elevator right now." The blood drained from Dante's face so fast I thought he was going to faint. He looked at the half-eaten lunch. He looked at the unsigned papers on the desk. He looked at the mess I had made. The elevator chimed in the hallway. Dante looked at me, his eyes pleading. "Dad, the signature. I need the signature. Now. Please. If I don't have that asset to show them, Elijah wiped his mouth with the napkin and stood up slowly. He picked up his canvas bag. "It is too late for signatures, son," Elijah said, his voice cutting through the panic like a knife. "The bill has come due, and I believe you are about to find out that the price of betrayal is higher than any lobster on this table." The silence in the office was no longer the quiet of a library or a sanctuary. It was the suffocating silence of a tomb before the stone is rolled away. When the assistant Sarah closed the door, her words about the auditors and the police hung in the air like toxic smoke. I watched my son, and for the first time in 30 years, I didn't see the man he pretended to be. I saw the ruin he actually was. The mask of the successful attorney, the facade of the dutiful son, it all melted away under the heat of imminent destruction, leaving behind something raw and terrified. Dante began to pace. It wasn't the confident stride of a CEO. It was the frantic skittering of a trapped animal. He ran his hands through his perfectly gelled hair, destroying the style until he looked wild. He loosened his silk tie as if it were a noose tightening around his neck. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the window, then the door, then the shredder in the corner, and finally on me. "They are going to look at the client trust accounts," Dante whispered. His voice was a dry rattle. "They are going to see the withdrawal. Oh God, they are going to see the withdrawal." He stopped in front of Brittany, who was sitting on the sofa looking pale and confused. He grabbed her hand and pulled it up roughly. He stared at the diamond ring on her finger. It was a massive stone, a rock that sparkled under the office lights. I had assumed it cost a fortune. I didn't know the fortune belonged to someone else. "Take it off," Dante hissed. "Take it off right now." Brittany yanked her hand back. "What are you doing, Dante? You are hurting me." "I am not taking off my engagement ring." "You don't understand, you stupid woman," Dante screamed, and spittle flew from his mouth. "That isn't a ring. That is evidence. That is $300,000 of Mrs. Henderson's estate. That is the money I was supposed to be holding in trust for a widow with dementia. I took it. I took it to buy you that rock because you said the first one wasn't big enough." Brittany stared at him, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. You stole it. You told me it was a bonus. You told me you won a big case." "I lied," Dante roared. "I lied about everything. The bonus, the investments, the condo in Miami. It is all leverage. It is all debt. And now the auditors are downstairs and the account is empty. If I don't put $300,000 back into the trust fund in the next 10 minutes, I am going to prison. Do you understand? Federal prison." He turned to me. His eyes were wide and bloodshot. The desperation coming off him was palpable, like the heat from a backdraft. He realized that I was his only way out. I was the only asset he had left that was liquid enough to cover the hole he had dug. He rushed over to the desk where the torn pieces of the first contract lay scattered. He swept them onto the floor. He grabbed a blank sheet of paper and began writing frantically. His hand shook so bad the pen almost tore through the page. "Dad," he said, and his voice changed again. It went from angry to pleading. It was a sound I hadn't heard since he was 6 years old and broke my favorite watch. "Dad, please. You have to help me. I can fix this. I just need a bridge loan. That is all it is. A bridge loan." He came around the desk. He didn't stand over me this time. He didn't try to intimidate me. He did something that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. He fell to his knees. My son, the high-powered lawyer in his $5,000 suit, dropped to the Persian rug and crawled the last few feet to where I was standing. He grabbed my hand. His palms were clammy and cold. "Dad, please. I am your son. I am Dante. Look at me." I looked down at him. I tried to pull my hand away, but he held on with a death grip. "I didn't mean to do it, Dad," he sobbed. Tears began to stream down his face, mixing with the sweat. It was the market. I made some bad calls on crypto. I thought it would bounce back. I was trying to double the client's money. I was trying to be smart. I wanted to give you everything, Dad. I wanted to buy you a better house. I wanted to make you proud. He was lying. Even in his confession, he was lying. He didn't invest in crypto for me. He bought jewelry for his wife. He bought status. But hearing him say he wanted to make me proud was a dagger in my chest. Every father wants to be the hero of his son's story. Every father wants to believe that his sacrifices mattered. "It is not just money, Dad," Dante cried, burying his face in my rough palm. "If they find out, they will disbar me. They will take my license. They will take my life. I will be nothing. I will be a felon. Do you want to see me in an orange jumpsuit?" Do you want to see me behind bars? He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Mom wouldn't want that, Dad. Mom would save me. She would give me the house. She would give me anything to keep me safe. Don't you love me as much as she did? That was the lowest blow. Using Bessie. Using the memory of the woman who worked herself into an early grave to give him a chance at a better life. But God help me, it worked. I remembered Bessie's dying wish. Take care of our boy Otis. Promise me you will take care of him. I looked at the handwritten note he had shoved in front of me. It was messy, scrawled, but legal enough. I, Otis King, hereby transfer immediate control of my pension fund and the deed to 452 Maple Avenue to Dante King. It was everything I had. It was my past and my future. If I signed this, I would be destitute. I would be homeless. I would be sleeping on a cot in a shelter. But if I didn't sign, my son would be destroyed. The conflict raged inside me like a wildfire. Logic told me he was a criminal. Logic told me he was a predator who had preyed on the weak. But love is not logical. Love is a blind, stumbling thing. I looked at his pathetic, heaving shoulders. I saw the little boy who used to wait for me at the fire station window. I saw the teenager who studied by candlelight when the power got cut off. I couldn't let him go to prison. I couldn't be the one to push the button on the electric chair. I looked over at Elijah. The old man hadn't moved. He sat in the velvet chair watching the scene with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't judgment. It was sadness. Deep, profound sadness. He knew what was happening. He knew I was being manipulated. He knew Dante was using the weapon of fatherhood against me. Elijah didn't shake his head. He didn't tell me to stop. He just looked at me with those piercing hazel eyes as if to say, "This is your test, Otis, not his." I looked back at Dante. "If I do this," I whispered, my voice trembling, "if I give you the house, will you pay it back? Will you make it right?" Dante nodded vigorously, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "Yes, Dad. Yes. I swear, on Mom's grave, I will pay back every cent. I just need to cover the audit. Once they leave, I can move money around. I can fix it. Just save me. Please, save me." He shoved the pen into my hand. I took it. The plastic felt slippery in my sweaty fingers. The room seemed to tilt. The walls were closing in. I could hear the sirens outside, but maybe they were just ringing in my ears. "I am sorry, Bessie," I thought. I promised to protect him, even from himself. I leaned over the desk. My hand hovered over the paper. My arm felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My arthritis flared up, a sharp burning pain in my wrist, warning me, stopping me. But I pushed through the pain. I touched the tip of the pen to the paper. A small dot of ink appeared. Dante held his breath. Brittany leaned forward from the couch, her eyes wide and hungry again. I started to write the first letter of my name. O. My hand shook so violently the letter looked like a jagged scar. "Just sign it, Dad," Dante whispered, his voice tight with anticipation. "Just sign it, and it all goes away." I took a breath. I prepared to sacrifice my life for the life of the monster I had created. I prepared to lose everything. But then the door handle turned. It wasn't a knock this time. It was the heavy, decisive click of a master key unlocking the latch. And the pen froze in my hand. The sound of the key turning in the lock echoed like a gunshot in the silence of the office, but it was the weight of a hand on my wrist that stopped time. I had been ready to sign away my life, ready to bleed myself dry, to save the son I loved. But Elijah Stone would not let me fall. His hand covered mine completely. His skin was rough like sandpaper and warm, a stark contrast to the cold sweat that was slicking my own palms. He didn't grip me hard. He just rested his hand there with the immovable weight of a mountain. I looked up at him. The playfulness was gone from his eyes. The act of the senile old wanderer had vanished completely, leaving behind a gaze that was ancient and terrifyingly clear. He looked at me, and then he looked at Dante, and his voice dropped an octave, vibrating in the quiet room like a cello string. "Do not sign that paper, Otis." Dante let out a strangled noise, a sound of pure desperation. He reached across the desk, his fingers clawing at the air. "No. Don't listen to him, Dad. He is crazy. He is just a crazy old man. Sign it. The auditors are here. The police are here. Sign it or I am dead." Elijah didn't even look at Dante. He kept his eyes locked on mine. "You think you are saving him," Elijah said softly. "You think you are being a good father. But if you sign that paper, you are not throwing him a lifeline, Otis. You are tying an anchor around his neck. You are teaching him that there are no consequences for his sins. You are teaching him that he can steal and lie and cheat, and his daddy will always be there to clean up the mess. That isn't love, Otis. That is an enablement. If you sign that you aren't saving him from prison, you are pushing him into a hell much deeper than any jail cell, a hell where he never learns to be a man." The words hit me harder than any physical blow. I looked at the pen in my hand. I looked at the ink staining the tip. I realized Elijah was right. I had spent my whole life shielding Dante from the heat of the fire, and because of that, he had never learned not to play with matches. I slowly lowered the pen. I let it drop from my fingers. It rolled across the document, leaving a long black smear before falling onto the expensive carpet. "No," I whispered. The word hung in the air, small but absolute. Dante froze. He stared at the pen on the floor. He stared at his empty hands. And then he looked at Elijah. In that split second, something inside my son broke. The fear that had been paralyzing him, the fear of the ring on Elijah's finger, the fear of the founder's ghost, it all evaporated in the heat of his panic. When a rat is cornered, it doesn't care if it is facing a lion or a god, it attacks. The terror of the auditors walking down the hall overrode everything else. His survival instinct kicked in, and it was ugly. "You old bastard," Dante screamed. It wasn't a human sound, it was a shriek. He didn't walk around the desk, he launched himself over it. He swept the crystal water pitcher, the expensive lamp, and the tray of oysters onto the floor with a crash that shattered the world. Glass flew everywhere. Dante landed on the other side, his face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hate. He wasn't seeing the founder of the company anymore. He was seeing an obstacle. He was seeing the man who had whispered in my ear and taken away his only escape route. "You ruined it," Dante roared, spit flying from his mouth. I had him ready to sign. "You dirty, homeless piece of trash. Who do you think you are coming into my office, eating my food and judging me?" He lunged at Elijah. It happened so fast. One moment Elijah was sitting in the velvet chair, the next Dante had grabbed him by the lapels of his ragged coat and hauled him up. Elijah was frail underneath those layers. He stumbled, his bad leg giving way. Dante slammed him back against the floor-to-ceiling window. The glass shuddered under the impact. "Dante!" I shouted, scrambling to my feet. "Stop it! Let him go!" But Dante couldn't hear me. He was blind with rage. He shook the old man, his knuckles white. "You think you are better than me?" Dante screamed into Elijah's face. "You think you can just walk in here and preach to me? I built this life. Me, not you. I deserve this. I deserve to survive." Elijah didn't fight back. He didn't raise his hands. He just looked at Dante with that same sorrowful expression. And that made Dante even madder. Brittany was standing by the door, clutching her phone, her eyes wide with a mix of horror and excitement. "Call security," she shrieked. "Dante, kill him. Get him out of here. He attacked us. Tell them he attacked us." She was already spinning the narrative. Even as her husband assaulted an old man, she was figuring out how to blame the victim. "Security," Brittany yelled into her phone. "Level 42, we are being assaulted by 2 transients. Send everyone. They are violent. They have weapons. Hurry!" Dante raised a fist. He was going to hit him. My son, the lawyer, the boy who used to cry when he stepped on a bug, was pulling back his fist to strike a 75-year-old man. No. The firefighter in me woke up. The arthritis vanished. The pain in my back disappeared. I wasn't 72 anymore. I was 35 and I was breaking down a door. I threw myself at Dante. I hit him with my shoulder, tackling him away from Elijah. We crashed into the side of the mahogany desk. "Dad, get off me!" Dante yelled, thrashing like a wild animal. I grabbed his arms, pinning them to his sides. I was stronger than I looked. 30 years of hauling hoses doesn't leave you just because your hair turns gray. "Stop it, Dante," I panted, struggling to hold him. "Look at yourself. Look at what you are doing. You are assaulting an old man. You have lost your mind." Dante looked at me. His eyes were wild. He didn't see his father. He saw another enemy. He twisted his body violently, breaking my grip. He shoved me. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a hard, vicious shove with all his weight behind it. I stumbled backward. My feet got tangled in the Persian rug. I flailed my arms, trying to find balance, but there was nothing to grab. I fell hard. My head struck the sharp corner of the decorative molding on the wall. A blinding flash of white light exploded behind my eyes. Then came the darkness. Then came the pain, sharp and hot, trickling down my forehead. I slumped to the floor, dazed. I put a hand to my brow, and when I pulled it away, my fingers were wet and red. Dad Dante gasped. He froze, his hand still extended from the shove. The room went silent except for the heavy breathing of 3 men and the hysterical sobbing of a woman. I looked up at him through a haze of pain. Blood dripped into my eyes, stinging and blurring my vision. I saw my son standing there, his chest heaving, his tie torn, his expensive suit rumpled. He looked at the blood on my face. For a second, I thought I saw regret. I thought I saw him wake up, but then his eyes hardened again. He looked at the door. He looked at the time. "It is your fault," Dante whispered, backing away. "You made me do this. You shouldn't have fought me. You should have just signed." He turned back to Elijah, who had slumped to the floor near the window, clutching his chest. "You!" Dante hissed, pointing a trembling finger at Elijah. "You are going to tell the police you attacked my father. You are going to tell them you did this. If you don't, I swear to God I will kill you both." Brittany was nodding frantically by the door. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes." The hobo went crazy. He wanted money. He hit Otis. That is the story. That is the story. I tried to stand up, but the room spun. I watched helpless as my son and his wife conspired to frame an innocent man for their own violence. I watched them construct a lie over my bleeding body. And then the lock on the main door clicked again, but this time it wasn't a key. It was a battering ram of authority. The double doors burst open with a crash that shook the walls. Security. Brittany screamed, pointing a manicured finger at Elijah. "There he is. That is him. He has a knife. He hit my father-in-law. Shoot him. Shoot him now." A team of 6 men in tactical gear stormed into the room. They wore black uniforms with the company logo on the chest. They moved with the precision of a SWAT team. They swept into the room, boots thudding on the floor, weapons drawn. Dante fell back against the desk, raising his hands, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank God," he panted. "Officers, arrest this man. He is dangerous. But the guards didn't look at Elijah. They didn't even look at me bleeding on the floor. They moved past us like a river flowing around rocks. They moved in a phalanx, a wall of black determination. "Get on the ground," the lead officer shouted, his voice booming like thunder. Dante looked confused. He pointed at Elijah again. "Yes, get him on the ground. He is right there." "No, sir," the officer barked, leveling a taser straight at Dante's chest. The red laser dot danced on Dante's silk tie right over his heart. "I am talking to you, Mr. King. Get on the ground, now. Hands behind your head. Do it, or you will be neutralized." Dante's mouth fell open. But I am the CEO. I am the victim here. My wife called you." "Down," the officer roared, stepping forward and kicking Dante's legs out from under him. Dante hit the floor with a thud, his face pressing into the same carpet he had been so worried about staining just minutes ago. Brittany screamed a high, piercing sound that shattered the last of the tension. She backed into the corner, clutching her diamond ring, terrified. I watched from the floor, wiping blood from my eyes. I saw the guards swarm my son, cuffing his hands behind his back with plastic zip ties. I saw the look of absolute shock on his face as the world he thought he controlled turned against him. And then through the forest of black boots and tactical legs I saw Elijah. He was pulling himself up using the windowsill for support. He wasn't looking at the guards. He was looking at me. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean handkerchief. He limped over to me, ignoring the chaos, ignoring the shouting, ignoring the weeping of my daughter-in-law. He knelt down beside me, his old knees cracking. He pressed the cloth gently against the cut on my forehead. "Hold this tight, Otis," he whispered, his voice calm amidst the storm. "The bleeding will stop, the pain will fade. But what you are seeing now, this is the truth, and the truth always leaves a scar." Dưới đây là phần 10 của kịch bản được viết chi tiết bằng tiếng Anh theo phong cách bạn yêu cầu tập trung vào nội dung, không có tiêu đề phân đoạn dòng chảy câu chuyện liên tục để phù hợp với việc đọc voice-over truyền cảm. Oh. The room was spinning, but it wasn't from the blow to my head anymore. It was from the sheer impossible gravity of what was happening. I sat there on the floor, clutching the handkerchief to my bleeding forehead, watching my son pressed into the carpet by a knee in his back. The tactical team had secured the room with a terrifying efficiency. Brittany was huddled in the corner, sobbing into her hands, her mascara running in black rivers down her pale cheeks. But the center of the universe wasn't the police, and it wasn't my son. It was the man standing by the window, the head of security, A man named Henderson, whom I had seen on the news giving press conferences, walked past Dante as if he were a piece of furniture. He didn't look at the CEO. He didn't ask the man in the $5,000 suit for orders. He walked straight to the man in the dirty coat. Henderson stopped 3 feet away. He snapped his heels together and bowed his head slightly. It wasn't a nod of politeness. It was a bow of deep deferential respect. Chairman Stone Henderson said, his voice breaking the silence like a hammer on glass. "I apologize for the delay, sir. The express elevator was locked out from the inside. Are you injured?" Dante tried to lift his head from the carpet. He twisted his neck, straining against the officer holding him down. His eyes were wide and bloodshot, filled with a confusion so deep it looked like madness. Chairman Dante wheezed, spitting carpet fibers from his mouth. "Henderson, what are you doing? That is a bum. That is a homeless man. I told you to arrest him. I sign your paychecks, you idiot." Henderson turned slowly. He looked down at Dante with a mixture of pity and disgust. "You sign the checks," Henderson said coldly, "but this man owns the bank." Dante stopped struggling. He went limp. He stared at Elijah. Chairman Stone. The name floated in the air. I looked at my friend. I looked at the man I had shared a bus seat with, the man I had defended from teenagers, the man who had eaten lobster with his bare hands. Elijah Stone. The Elijah Stone. The founder. The legend. The man who had built this city's skyline and then vanished into seclusion 10 years ago. Rumors said he was dead. Rumors said he was living on a private island. No one said he was riding the number 42 bus. Elijah stepped away from the window, and as he moved, something miraculous happened. The limp was still there, but the frailty was gone. He straightened his spine. His shoulders rolled back. He seemed to grow 3 inches taller right before our eyes. He reached up and adjusted the collar of his ragged coat, but he did it with the elegance of a man adjusting an ermine robe. The trembling in his hands, the shaking that had made him drop the coins on the bus, it simply vanished. It had been an act, a performance so perfect it had fooled us all. He looked down at his clothes, then he looked at Dante. "I may look like a bum, Dante." Elijah said, his voice deep and resonant, stripped of the raspy wheeze he had used all day. "But unlike you, I do not need a suit to be a king." Elijah walked over to me. He moved with a slow, predatory grace. He reached into the deep pocket of his filthy coat. I expected him to pull out another rag. Instead, he withdrew a square of cloth that shimmered in the office light. It was silk. Pure royal blue silk with a monogram embroidered in gold thread. E.S. He knelt beside me again. He took the bloody handkerchief from my hand and replaced it with the silk one. It felt cool and smooth against my skin. "I am sorry about the theatrics," Otis Elijah said softly, his eyes warm and apologetic. I needed to see how far he would go. I needed to see if there was anything left in him worth saving. "I am sorry you had to bleed for me to find the answer." I stared at him. "You are him," I whispered. "You are the billionaire. I am just a man who hates bullies." Otis Elijah smiled. "And I am a man who pays his debts. You bought me a bus ticket. The least I can do is buy you some justice." Elijah stood up. He turned to face the room. He didn't look at Brittany. He didn't look at the guards. He focused his entire being on Dante. Dante was shaking his head back and forth, tears streaming down his face. No, it is a trick. You are lying." Elijah walked to the desk. He picked up the broken pieces of the pen I had smashed. He turned it over in his fingers. "Do you know why I founded this firm?" Elijah asked. He wasn't shouting. He was speaking in a conversational tone which made it all the more terrifying. "I grew up in a shack in Alabama. My father was a sharecropper. I watched rich men take everything from him with a pen and a smile. I swore that if I ever made money, I would use the law as a shield for the weak, not a sword for the greedy." He threw the broken pen onto the floor next to Dante's face. "I built this tower to protect people like your father," Elijah continued, his voice hardening into steel. "People who worked until their backs broke, people who sacrificed, and for 30 years I thought my legacy was safe. But then last month I was sitting in the park across the street. I was feeding the pigeons. Just an old man in a coat." Dante flinched. He remembered. I could see it in his eyes. "Yes," Elijah nodded, seeing the recognition. "You came out of the lobby with a client." I was sitting on a bench near the entrance. I wasn't begging. I was just sitting. "You called security. You told them to remove the trash because it was ruining the view for your investors. You didn't even look at me. You just waved your hand and ordered men to remove a human being like I was a pile of dead leaves. I watched that happen, Elijah said, and I wondered. If a man treats a stranger like garbage, how does he treat his own blood? So I started watching you. I rode the bus. I dug into the files. And today I gave you a chance to show mercy, a chance to show respect, a chance to be a son. Elijah leaned down, getting right in Dante's face. And you failed, Dante. You failed in every way a man can fail. You didn't just try to steal from your father. You tried to destroy his soul to save your own skin. You are not a lawyer. You are a predator. And I do not allow predators in my house. Dante sobbed. Sir, please, I can explain. It was the pressure, the debt. I can fix it. I can pay it back. Don't ruin me. Elijah stood up straight. He looked at the panoramic view of the city one last time. I am not ruining you, son, Elijah said coldly. I am simply letting gravity do its work. Elijah raised his hands and clapped once, a sharp, singular sound. The door to the hallway opened again. 2 men and a woman walked in. They were not police. They were dressed in suits that cost more than Dante's car. They carried briefcases and a video camera. I recognized one of them from the news. It was the district attorney. Gentlemen, Elijah said, gesturing to Dante and Brittany, the floor is yours. I believe we have a case of embezzlement, elder abuse, and assault, and I believe we have it all recorded on the security system I had installed in this office yesterday. The camera's red light blinked on. Dante closed his eyes and let out a long, low moan of defeat. The legend had revealed himself, and the judgment was final. The glass cage had just become a prison cell. The red light of the video camera was a silent, unblinking eye staring into the soul of the room, but it was nothing compared to the gaze of Elijah Stone as he placed the black leather folder onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards and up into the soles of my shoes. This wasn't just a collection of papers. It was an autopsy of my son's integrity. It was the physical proof of every lie, every theft, and every betrayal that Dante had woven into the fabric of his success. The room was so quiet I could hear the hum of the hard drive in the camera and the ragged breathing of the man who had once been my pride and joy. Elijah didn't rush. He opened the cover of the file with the deliberate slowness of a preacher opening a Bible at a funeral. He smoothed the first page flat. He didn't look at the district attorney, and he didn't look at the police. He looked straight at Dante, who was still pinned to the floor, his cheek pressed against the carpet fibers, his eyes wide with a terror that transcended the fear of prison. It was the fear of being truly seen, Exhibit A. Elijah read, his voice calm and terrifyingly clear. March 14th of this year, the estate of Mrs. Clara Higgins, 89 years old, blind, a resident of the Sunnyvale Assisted Living Facility. According to these bank records obtained directly from the internal server, you initiated a transfer of $45,000 from her trust account to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands, a company named, deeply ironically, King Holdings. Elijah turned the page. The sound of the crisp paper turning was like a whip crack. Exhibit B, April 2nd. Mr. Arthur Miller, a retired veteran with early onset Alzheimer's. You forged his signature on a liquidation order selling his family farm in upstate New York for a fraction of its value to a developer who just happens to be a college friend of yours. The kickback into your personal account was $120,000. You left a man who fought for this country with nothing but a rented room and a confused mind. Dante whimpered on the floor. No, he gasped. That is not true. That is a misunderstanding. Elijah didn't stop. He turned another page, and another. Each page was a nail in the coffin. May 10th, June 4th, July 19th. The dates rolled off his tongue like a litany of sins. He listed names of widows, names of grandfathers, names of people who had worked their whole lives just like me, people who trusted a man in a suit to protect their legacy. And in every single case, Dante had looked at them and seen prey. He had seen their vulnerability not as something to protect, but as a weakness to exploit. Here is the most interesting one, Elijah said, stopping at a page near the back. August 1st. A withdrawal of $15,000 from the account of a Mrs. Beatrice Johnson. The memo line says legal fees, but the credit card statement from that same day shows a purchase at a luxury jewelry store for a diamond tennis bracelet. Tell me, Dante, did Mrs. Johnson enjoy her bracelet? Or is it currently on the wrist of your wife? The district attorney stepped forward, his face grim. He leaned over the desk, looking at the documents. "The evidence is irrefutable, Mr. Stone. The digital footprints are all there. The IP addresses match this office. The timestamps match his login. This is grand larceny fraud and elder abuse on a systemic scale." I stood there, leaning against the wall, feeling a sickness rise in my throat that had nothing to do with my injury. I listened to the numbers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money stolen from people who couldn't fight back. And I realized with a horror that chilled my blood that I was just the next name on the list. If Elijah hadn't stopped me, if I had signed that paper, my name would be Exhibit Z. Otis King. Deceased. Destitute. Dante struggled against the cuffs. The denial began to pour out of him, a frantic stream of consciousness that made no sense. "It wasn't me," he screamed, twisting his head to look at the DA. "It was Sarah. My assistant. She has the passwords. She did it. She is setting me up. I didn't know. I am too busy. I signed things without looking. It was her. Arrest her." I looked at Sarah standing by the door. She wasn't crying anymore. She was looking at Dante with a cold, hard hatred. She held up her tablet. "I have the emails, Dante," she said, her voice steady. "I have the emails where you told me to falsify the ledgers. I have the voice memos you sent me at 3 a.m. drunk telling me how to hide the transfers. I kept everything, because I knew this day would come." Dante's face crumbled. His scapegoat had fought back. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, searching for an exit, searching for a lifeline. He looked at the window, but he couldn't fly. He looked at Brittany, but she was looking at the floor. And then his eyes found me. He stopped struggling. His body went still. He looked at me with the same expression he used to have when he was 10 years old and broke the neighbor's window with a baseball. It was a look of pathetic, calculated innocence. A look that said, "Daddy, fix it." I remembered that day. I remembered walking over to the neighbor's house, taking the blame, paying for the glass out of my own pocket, telling the neighbor it was my clumsy mistake because I didn't want Dante to get in trouble. I didn't want him to have a record. I wanted him to have a clean slate. I had spent my entire life wiping his slate clean, absorbing his mistakes, taking the hits so he wouldn't have to. Dante wiggled across the carpet, inching toward my feet. "Dad," he whispered, and his voice was broken and small. "Dad, tell them. Tell them you authorized it." The room went deadly silent. Even the police officers stopped moving. Everyone looked at me. "Tell them you told me to move the money." Dante pleaded, his eyes locking onto mine with a hypnotic intensity. "You are old, Dad. They won't send you to prison. They will go easy on you. You have a clean record. You are a hero firefighter. If you say you told me to do it as a way to manage the family estate, they will believe you. It will just be a mismanagement charge. A fine. I can pay the fine. He was asking me to go to prison for him. He was asking me to destroy my name, my honor, and my legacy to save him from the consequences of his own greed. He was asking me to jump on a grenade that he had pulled the pin on. Dad, please," Dante sobbed, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the snot and the carpet dust. "I am your son. You promised Mom. You promised you would take care of me. Do this one last thing for me. Just say the words. Just say, I did it." I looked down at him. I looked at the man wearing the suit I had paid for with my sweat. I looked at the man who lived in the tower I had sacrificed my comfort to help him build. And for the first time in 32 years, I didn't see my son. I saw a stranger. I saw a coward. A man so hollow, so devoid of character that he would use his own father as a human shield. I saw the rot that Elijah had been talking about. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a cancer. And if I cut it out now, maybe, just maybe, I could save what was left of his soul. But if I covered for him again, if I took the fall, I would be killing him. I would be confirming that he was right, that he was special, that the rules didn't apply to him. I felt a tear roll down my cheek. It burned the cut on my forehead. I looked at Elijah. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. I took a deep breath. My chest hurt. My heart hurt. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed like a boulder. Dante blinked. "What?" I said, "No, Dante." I stepped back away from him, creating a physical distance between us that felt like an ocean. "I covered for you when you broke the window," I said, my voice gaining strength. "I covered for you when you failed math. I covered for you when you crashed your first car. I thought I was loving you. But I wasn't. I was crippling you. I looked at the district attorney. I did not authorize any transfers. I said clearly, my voice ringing in the office. My son stole from those people, and he tried to steal from me. He acted alone, and he needs to face what he has done. Dante let out a scream that sounded like an animal dying. No, you traitor, you are supposed to be my father. I am being your father, I whispered, looking down at him with a grief so heavy it threatened to crush me. And being a father means letting you grow up, even if it happens behind bars. Dante collapsed, sobbing into the rug, cursing me, cursing the world, cursing everything but himself. The officers hauled him up to his feet. As they dragged him toward the door, I saw movement in the corner of my eye. It was Brittany. She hadn't said a word during the reading of the file. She hadn't defended her husband. She hadn't offered to help him. She had been watching, calculating. And now as the ship was going down, the rat was looking for a lifeline. She was slowly inching backward toward the open door. Her hand was behind her back, reaching for the handle. She was trying to slip away unnoticed into the hallway, trying to separate herself from the disaster that was her marriage. She was going to run. She was going to take whatever jewelry she had hidden, whatever cash was in her purse, and vanish, leaving Dante to rot alone. But she forgot one thing. Elijah Stone didn't miss anything. Just as her hand touched the doorframe, Elijah's voice rang out, cutting through Dante's screams. "Ms. Brittany," Elijah said sharply, "where do you think you are going? We haven't gotten to your section of the file yet. Here is part 12 of the script written in English as requested, designed for an emotional AI voiceover reading. It focuses on the intense conflict and the unraveling of the betrayal flowing continuously without headers. Chapter. You learn a lot about structural integrity when you work in a fire department. You learn that a building doesn't always collapse because the fire burns the beams. Sometimes it collapses because the foundation was rotten long before the first spark was ever lit. I stood there against the wall, my head throbbing, and watched the foundation of my son's life crumble. It wasn't the police or the auditors that delivered the final blow. It was the woman standing by the door. Brittany, the woman Dante had stolen for. The woman he had destroyed his own father to please. When Elijah called her name, she froze. Her hand was hovering over the door handle, a perfectly manicured claw trying to scratch its way to freedom. She turned slowly, and the look on her face wasn't fear anymore. It was a cold, reptilian calculation. She looked at Dante writhing on the floor in cuffs, and then she looked at the district attorney. In that split second, she made a choice. She chose survival. "I didn't do it," Brittany screamed. Her voice was shrill, piercing the heavy air of the office like a siren. "I didn't know anything about the transfers. I am a victim here. He lied to me. Dante lied to me about everything." Dante stopped struggling. He lifted his head from the carpet, his cheek burned red from the friction. He looked at his wife with eyes that were wide with disbelief. It was the look of a man who wakes up to find his guardian angel holding a knife to his throat. "Brittany, what are you saying?" Dante rasped. "I am saying you are a criminal," Brittany yelled, pointing a shaking finger at him. "You told me the money came from bonuses. You told me the firm was doing well. I begged you to stop spending, but you wouldn't listen. You forced those gifts on me. You forced me to live this lifestyle to keep up appearances for your clients. I wanted a simple life." Dante let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "A simple life. You wanted a simple life. You threw a wine glass at my head last week because I booked a suite at the Ritz that didn't have an ocean view. You told me I was a failure because I couldn't buy you that Hermes Birkin bag. I never asked for that bag," Brittany shrieked, her eyes bulging. "You are a liar. You are a pathological liar. Officers, I am innocent. I am just a supportive wife who was manipulated by a sociopath. I didn't know he was stealing from old people. It is disgusting. I want a divorce. I want a lawyer, and I want a divorce right now." Dante stared at her. His heart was breaking right there on the rug. The money didn't matter anymore. The prison time didn't matter. This was the true punishment, seeing the woman he worshipped unmask herself as a monster. "You said you loved me," Dante whispered, his voice barely audible. "You said we were a team." "I loved the man I thought you were," Brittany spat back. "Not this crook. I have a reputation to think of, Dante. My father is a respected surgeon. Do you think I can be seen with an embezzler? You have ruined my life." She turned to the police, pleading with her hands clasped. "Please let me go. I need to call my parents. I need to get away from him. He is dangerous. He threatened me. He made me sign things I didn't understand." The room was silent. The district attorney looked at her with skepticism, but without hard evidence. She was just a witness. She was playing the part perfectly, the distraught trophy wife kept in the dark by her evil husband. She took a step toward the door again, emboldened by the silence. She thought she had won. She thought she could wash her hands of the mud she had helped create. But she forgot about me. She forgot about the old man she had called a savage. She forgot that savages have ears. And sometimes savages have technology they don't quite understand how to turn off. I reached into the pocket of my suit jacket. My fingers brushed against the cracked screen of my old smartphone. I pulled it out. My hands were shaking not from age, but from the sheer weight of what I was about to do. I was about to destroy my son's marriage, but looking at them now, I realized there was no marriage to destroy. There was only a transaction. I cleared my throat. The sound was rough and guttural. "Stop," I said. Brittany turned to look at me, her lip curled in a sneer. "Stay out of this, Otis. Go back to your trash can." I didn't answer her. I didn't have the words. I let the phone speak for me. "You see, this morning when I was in the basement, when I found Bessie's chair, I tried to call my friend Big Mike to ask him for a ride. But my fingers were slippery with sweat and panic. I didn't hit call. I hit the voice memo app. And I didn't hit stop until I got on the bus. I held the phone up. It looked ancient compared to the sleek devices on the desk. I pressed the play button. For a moment, there was only the hiss of static. Then came the sound of a metal door slamming. And then, clear as a bell, Brittany's voice filled the room. "I don't care if he cries Dante, just get rid of the chair. It smells like dead people." Brittany's face went white. She stopped breathing. The recording continued. There was the sound of my voice pleading for the chair and then silence as I walked away. But the recording didn't stop. It kept running as Dante and Brittany walked back to the elevator thinking I was gone. "He is so pathetic," Brittany's voice on the recording sneered. "Did you give him the bus pass?" "Yeah," Dante's voice replied, sounding tired. "He is coming at 10. "Good," Brittany said. And then she said the words that would seal her fate. "Make sure he signs the power of attorney first thing." I looked at the Mercedes website this morning. The G-Wagon is back in stock. If we liquidate his house and drain that pension fund, we can put the down payment on it by Friday. I am not driving that BMW anymore, Dante. It is 2 years old. It is embarrassing. "I know, babe," Dante said on the tape. "I will get him to sign. He trusts me. He is desperate for attention. Just be nice to him for an hour and we can take him for everything he has. I hate being nice to him." Brittany's voice laughed a cruel, icy sound. "He smells like smoke and cheap soap. Just trick the old fool quickly. I want my car." I pressed stop. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy and suffocating. Brittany wasn't moving. She stood frozen, her hand halfway to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. The victim mask had been ripped off, and underneath was something ugly and greedy. Dante looked up from the floor. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at his wife. The realization washed over him like a cold wave. She hadn't been pressured. She hadn't been forced. She had been the architect. She was the one pushing for the car, pushing for the liquidation, pushing him to rob his own father. "You wanted the car," Dante whispered. "You told the police I forced you. But you just wanted a car." Brittany started to shake. It wasn't the fake trembling of a victim. It was the terrified shaking of a criminal caught red-handed. That is out of context," she stammered, backing away until her back hit the wall. "We were joking. It was a joke." Elijah stepped forward. He took the phone from my hand gently. He turned to the district attorney. "I believe that is what you call conspiracy to commit fraud," Elijah said calmly. "And since she just admitted on tape to planning the liquidation of assets to fund a luxury purchase, I believe she is no longer a witness. She is an accomplice." The district attorney nodded grimly. He gestured to the officers. "Cuff her." "No," Brittany screamed as the officers moved in. "No, you can't do this. My father knows the mayor. I am not going to jail. I am Brittany King." The officers didn't care who her father was. They spun her around. The sound of the zip ties zipping shut was the loudest sound in the world. It was the sound of justice. Dante watched as his wife was restrained. He didn't fight for her. He didn't yell. He just started to laugh. It was a broken, hollow laugh. The laugh of a man who realizes he has sold his soul for a woman who would trade him for a car. "We deserve this," Dante said, staring at the ceiling. We both deserve this. I looked at them, my son and his wife, bound and broken in the wreckage of their own greed. I felt no joy. I felt no triumph. I just felt a deep, aching exhaustion. I had come here to save my son from a nursing home, but I ended up sending him to a cell. The room felt small. I needed air. I needed to breathe. And then from far below, from the streets that looked like ants, came a sound. Whoop, whoop, wail. Sirens. Not just one, a dozen. They were wailing in a discordant chorus, rising up the canyon of steel and glass. They were coming for the auditors. They were coming for the evidence. They were coming to wash the corruption away. The sound grew louder and louder, vibrating against the glass windows until it filled the office, drowning out Brittany's sobbing and Dante's laughter. It was the sound of the end. And standing there with Elijah's hand on my shoulder, I realized it was also the sound of a new beginning. The sound of plastic zip ties cinching tight is a sound that stays with you. It is a dry, ratchet noise like the legs of a cricket rubbing together, but final, irreversible. When the officer pulled Dante's wrists behind his back and tightened that plastic loop, it sounded like a spine snapping. My son, the man who had just minutes ago been the master of the universe, screaming about his power and his legacy, was suddenly reduced to a heap of expensive fabric and weeping flesh on the floor. Dante didn't try to fight the officers. He didn't quote the law. He didn't threaten to sue. The moment the cold reality of the handcuffs touched his skin, the high-powered attorney vanished, and the terrified little boy returned. He twisted his neck, straining against the grip of the tactical team, his face mashed into the carpet he had once been so proud of. His eyes found mine. They were wide, wet, and filled with a primal panic. "Daddy!" he screamed. He hadn't called me daddy in 30 years. Not since he was a toddler running to me with a scraped knee. The word hit me like a physical blow to the chest, knocking the wind out of me more effectively than the shove he had given me earlier. "Daddy, help me!" Dante wailed, his voice cracking. "Don't let them take me. I am scared. Please, Daddy. Fix it. You always fix it." The officers hauled him to his feet. He couldn't stand straight. His legs were jelly. He slumped between two burly guards, his Italian loafers dragging on the floor, the toes scuffing the polished wood. He looked small. So incredibly small. The suit that had looked like armor an hour ago now looked like a costume that was too big for him. "Otis," the district attorney said, gently touching my arm. "You don't have to watch this. You can step into the other room." I shook my head. "No, I have to watch. I have to see it." Dante was sobbing now, a raw, ugly sound that echoed off the glass walls. "Daddy, please, tell them. Tell them it was a mistake. I will give the money back. I will give you the house. I will give you anything. Just don't let them put me in the cage. I can't go to the cage." Every instinct in my body screamed at me to move. It was the firefighter instinct, the father instinct, the biological imperative that says protect your young at all costs. My muscles twitched. My feet wanted to run to him. My hands wanted to push the officers away, to cut the ties, to scoop him up and carry him out of the burning building, just like I had carried so many strangers. I closed my eyes, and for a heartbeat, I wasn't in a penthouse office. I was back in the small living room on Maple Avenue. It was 1986. Dante was 2 years old. He was taking his first steps, wobbling across the linoleum, his chubby hands reaching out for me, his eyes bright with trust. He stumbled, he fell, he looked at me and cried, waiting for me to pick him up. And I did. I always did. Then the memory shifted. I saw him at 10 years old standing in the principal's office because he had cheated on a test. I saw myself arguing with the principal, telling him my son was just stressed, telling him to give the boy another chance. I fixed it. I saw him at 18, graduating high school in his blue gown. I saw the pride in his eyes, but I also saw the arrogance, the belief that he had gotten away with skipping classes because I had smoothed it over with the administration. I saw him at 25 asking for the down payment on his first condo. I saw myself dipping into my savings, handing him the check because I wanted him to have the start I never had. I opened my eyes. The man weeping in front of me wasn't a victim of the system. He was a victim of my protection. I had spent his entire life building a cushion under him so he would never feel the impact of a fall. I had caught him every single time. And because I had always caught him, he had never learned that gravity is real. He had never learned that actions have weight. He thought he could fly because I had been holding him up. Dante looked at me, his face streaked with tears and snot. "Why aren't you doing anything?" he screamed. "You are my father. You are supposed to save me." I took a step forward. The officers paused, waiting to see what I would do. Dante's eyes lit up with a flicker of hope. He thought I was coming to intervene. He thought I was coming to take the blame. I stopped 3 feet away from him. I looked deep into his eyes, past the fear, past the greed, down to the little boy hiding inside. "I'm saving you," I said. My voice was broken, rough, with unshed tears, but it was steady. Dante blinked, confused. "What? Then tell them to let me go." "No, Dante," I whispered. "If I let you go now, you will never come back. If I fix this for you, you will be broken forever." I reached out, and for a second I wanted to touch his cheek. I wanted to wipe away the tears, but I kept my hands at my sides. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. "I love you, son," I said, and the words felt like they were ripping my throat apart. "I love you more than my own life. I would die for you, but I will not lie for you, and I will not let you destroy your soul. You have to fall, Dante. You have to hit the bottom, because the bottom is the only place where you can find solid ground to stand on." Dante stared at me. The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a look of absolute betrayal. "You hate me," he whispered. "You are jealous of me. You want to see me fail." I didn't answer. I couldn't. If I spoke again, I would break. I would fall to my knees and beg the police to take me instead. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my 72 years of life. Harder than walking into a fire. Harder than burying my wife. I turned my back on him. I physically turned my body away, facing the window, facing the city, facing the gray sky. My shoulders shook. A sob tore through my chest, but I bit my lip until I tasted blood to keep it silent. I heard Dante scream, a sound of pure anguish. "Daddy, don't turn around. Look at me. Look at me." I stared at the glass. I saw his reflection being dragged backward. I saw him struggling, fighting, kicking his shoes, leaving black scuff marks on the floor. I saw the look of terror as they pushed him through the door. "I love you," I whispered to the window. "I love you enough to let you go." The sounds of his screaming faded down the hallway. "Daddy, Daddy," until the heavy doors of the elevator chimed and slid shut, cutting off the sound like a blade. Silence rushed back into the room, a deafening, ringing silence. I stood there for a long time, staring at the city below. I felt old. Older than the mountains. I felt like I had just cut off my own limb to save the body. I wiped my face with the silk handkerchief Elijah had given me. It came away wet with tears and blood. I took a deep breath. The air in the room was still cold, but the heaviness was gone. The monster was gone. My son was gone. I turned back to the room. The police were gone. The auditors were packing up the files. But we weren't alone. In the corner near the door, pressed against the wall as if trying to merge with the wallpaper, stood Brittany. She hadn't moved. She hadn't said a word since the handcuffs clicked on her husband. She was trembling so hard her diamond earrings were vibrating. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and Elijah like a trapped rat looking for a sewer grate. She thought that because the police took Dante, the storm was over. She thought that because she was the wife, she was just a spectator. Elijah was sitting on the edge of the desk. He hadn't looked at Dante as he was dragged out. He had been watching Brittany. He was looking at her now with that same terrifying, calm intensity. He tapped the leather folder with his finger. "Well, Ms. Brittany," Elijah said softly, "the main act is over, but I believe we still have an encore to perform." The silence that followed Dante's exit was not empty. It was heavy and thick, filled with the static charge of unspent lightning. The door had closed on my son, but the storm remained in the room in the form of the woman standing in the corner. Brittany. The woman who had demanded a Mercedes while her husband was drowning. The woman who had looked at my wife's chair and called it garbage. She stood there shivering. The handcuffs were tight on her wrists, but it was the reality of her situation that was cutting into her skin. She watched the heavy oak door where Dante had disappeared, and then slowly, terrifyingly, her head turned toward me. The panic in her eyes shifted. The cold calculation I had seen earlier melted away, replaced by a sudden, desperate warmth that made my skin crawl. She realized that with Dante gone, I was the only thing standing between her and total ruin. I was the only witness left. I was the victim, and in her twisted mind, that meant I was the one she could manipulate. She took a step toward me. Her high heels clicked on the floor, a sound that used to signal her dominance but now sounded like the ticking of a bomb. She let out a sob. It was a perfect sob. The kind of sound that would break a heart if you didn't know it was manufactured in a laboratory of greed. "Dad," she whispered. The word hung in the air like a poisonous vapor. She hadn't called me Dad in 5 years. She usually called me Otis or him or your father, but now suddenly I was Dad. "Dad, please, look at me," Brittany cried, her voice trembling with an emotion that was almost convincing. "You know me. You know I am not like him. Dante, he changed. He became a monster. I was scared of him, Otis. I was terrified. He forced me to say those things on the tape. He made me demand the car. He said if I didn't act the part of the trophy wife, he would leave me with nothing." She shuffled closer, her hands bound behind her back, leaning forward so her tears could catch the light. "I tried to protect you. Dad," she sobbed. "I tried to tell him not to sell the house on Maple Avenue. I told him it was wrong, but he hit me. He hit me, Otis. She was lying. I knew she was lying. I had heard the tape. I had heard the venom in her voice when she talked about liquidating my assets. But she was good. She was so good that for a split second, a tiny part of my heart wanted to believe her. She was a beautiful young woman crying in a room full of men, and she knew exactly how to weaponize her fragility. "I am all you have left now, Dad," she whispered, her eyes wide and pleading. "Dante is gone. He is going to prison for a long time. Who is going to take care of you? Who is going to drive you to your appointments? Who is going to cook for you? I can do it. I can be the daughter you never had. We can start over. Just tell the police I was a hostage. Tell them I didn't know. Please, Dad. Do it for the family. Do it for the grandchild I might give you one day." She played the grandchild card. The imaginary baby she had refused to have for years because it would ruin her figure. She was throwing every emotional dart she had, hoping one would stick. I looked at her. I looked at the mascara running down her face in black rivulets. I looked at the expensive dress she wore, a dress that probably cost more than my entire year's pension. And then I looked past her to the empty corner of the room. The corner where she had stood this morning, sipping her green smoothie, while she ordered men to throw my life into a dumpster. I remembered the smell of the basement. I remembered the sight of Bessie's leather chair tipping over onto the cold concrete. I remembered Brittany's voice saying it smells like dead people. Something inside me hardened. It wasn't anger, it was something colder. It was the absolute zero of indifference. I took a step back, moving out of her orbit. I looked her up and down slowly, letting my gaze linger on the diamond earrings she was still wearing. "Don't call me Dad," I said. My voice was low and rough, like gravel grinding together. Brittany flinched as if I had slapped her. "But Otis..." "I said don't call me Dad," I repeated louder this time. "You lost the right to use that word the moment you looked at the only memory I have left of my wife and called it an eyesore." I pointed a finger at her. My hand was steady now. "You threw her chair in the garbage, Brittany. You stood there and watched an old man struggle to lift it, and you laughed. You told me it ruined your aesthetic. You told me it smelled. That chair held the woman who gave birth to the man you just destroyed. That chair held 40 years of love and sacrifice. And to you, it was just trash." I stepped closer to her, my shadow falling over her face. "If you could throw away a chair because it didn't fit your decor, what were you going to do with me when I became too old or too sick or too inconvenient? Were you going to throw me in the dumpster too, Brittany? Were you going to leave me in the basement with the recycling?" Brittany's mouth opened and closed. She tried to speak, but the truth was choking her. "You don't care about me," I said, my voice rising. "You don't care about Dante. You don't care about family. You care about the G-Wagon. You care about the country club. You are crying right now not because you lost your husband, but because you lost your credit limit." Brittany's face twisted. The mask of the weeping daughter fell away, revealing the snarling face of the entitled brat underneath. "You are a cruel old man," she hissed, her eyes narrowing into slits. "I was trying to be nice to you. I was trying to save you from dying alone. You are going to rot, Otis. You are going to rot in that cheap little house with your memories, and no one will care." "There it is," I said, nodding. "There is the real Brittany." I turned away from her. I was done. I had said my piece. But Elijah wasn't done. The old man had been standing by the window watching the exchange with the stillness of a judge. Now he moved. He walked toward Brittany, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He didn't look like a man in a ragged coat anymore. He looked like the owner of the skyline, He looked like a storm that had finally made landfall. He stopped in front of her. He didn't yell. He didn't raise his voice. He simply held out his hand palm up. "Give it to me," Elijah said. Brittany blinked. "Give you what?" Everything Elijah said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a cell phone. He tapped the screen a few times. "I have just spoken to the corporate finance department," Elijah said, his tone conversational but deadly. "It seems that every asset you possess, every stitch of clothing on your back, every piece of jewelry, and the car parked downstairs was purchased through the King Holdings corporate account. The apartment you live in is leased under the company name. The phone in your pocket is company property." Brittany went pale. "No, that is my stuff." "Dante gave it to me." "Dante gave you stolen property," Elijah corrected her. "And I am repossessing it. All of it." He gestured to the head of security, Henderson, who stepped forward with a large plastic evidence bag. "The earrings," Elijah said, pointing to her ears. "Now," Brittany gasped. "These are mine. They were bought with Mrs. Higgins' trust fund money," Elijah said. "Take them off, or the officer will take them off for you." Brittany's hands were cuffed, so Henderson stepped in. He wasn't rough, but he wasn't gentle. He unclasped the diamond studs and dropped them into the bag. "Click, click," the necklace, Elijah commanded. Henderson unclasped the platinum chain. Clink, the watch, the tennis bracelet, the rings. One by one, the symbols of her status were stripped away. With every item that dropped into the plastic bag, Brittany seemed to shrink. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was just a woman in a dress she couldn't afford, standing in an office she didn't own. "And the keys," Elijah said. Henderson reached into her purse, which was sitting on the sofa. He pulled out the key fob to the Mercedes G-Wagon. He dropped it into the bag. "My car," Brittany wailed, a sound of pure materialism dying. "You can't take my car. How am I supposed to get home?" "You aren't going home," Elijah said coldly. "The lease on the penthouse has been terminated, effective immediately. The locks are being changed as we speak. Your personal effects will be boxed up and sent to your parents' house in Jersey. Assuming they will take you in." "Jersey," Brittany shrieked. "I am not going back to Jersey. I am a Manhattan socialite. You are a co-conspirator in a federal fraud case," Elijah said. "And frankly, Jersey is better than where you are likely heading." He nodded to the officers. "Get her out of my building," Elijah said. "And do not let her use the express elevator. She can take the freight elevator, with the trash." The officers grabbed Brittany by the arms. She kicked and screamed. She cursed Elijah. She cursed me. She cursed the day she met Dante. She wasn't crying for mercy anymore. She was screaming out of pure entitlement. "I am a victim," she screamed as they dragged her across the Persian rug. "This is unfair. Look at my dress. You are wrinkling my dress. Do you know how much this cost?" I watched her go. I watched the woman who had terrorized my son and mocked my life being hauled away like a unruly drunk. She dug her heels into the carpet, leaving long tracks, but she was no match for the inevitable pull of justice. The doors opened. The officers shoved her into the hallway. Her screams echoed off the marble walls, getting fainter and fainter until the heavy doors slid shut with a final decisive thud. Thump. And then there was silence. It wasn't the awkward silence of a dinner party. It wasn't the fearful silence of a waiting room. It was the absolute profound silence of a battlefield after the last cannon has fired. The room was empty. The broken glass from the pitcher still lay on the floor. The torn pieces of the contract were scattered like confetti. The half-eaten lobster sat on the table, a grotesque monument to a celebration that never happened. I stood there in the center of the wreckage. I felt lightheaded. My adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. I looked at the empty chair where Dante had sat. I looked at the spot where Brittany had stood. They were gone, just like that. The noise, the demands, the greed, the manipulation, it had all been sucked out of the room, leaving a vacuum. I looked at Elijah. He was standing by the window looking out at the gray sky. He looked tired too. The transformation into the titan of industry had taken its toll, and now as he slumped slightly, I saw the old man from the bus again. He turned to me, and for a moment neither of us spoke. We just breathed. We breathed the air that was finally clean. "It is quiet," Elijah said softly. "Yes," I replied. "It is very quiet." "It is the sound of a storm passing," Elijah said. It leaves a mess, Otis, but it clears the air. He walked over to the desk and picked up the canvas bag he had carried all day. He reached inside and pulled out something I hadn't seen before. It was a bottle of cheap whiskey, the kind you buy at a corner store for $10. He cracked the seal, and the smell of rot-gut alcohol filled the room, mingling with the scent of the expensive seafood. He found 2 crystal glasses on the sidebar, the only ones that hadn't been smashed. He poured a generous shot into each one. He handed one to me. "To the Queen dethroned," Elijah said, raising his glass. "And to the king who kept his crown." I took the glass. My hand was shaking, but I held it steady. I looked at the amber liquid. It wasn't the 25-year-old scotch Dante had tried to impress us with. It was the drink of working men. It was the drink of truth. I clinked my glass against his. "To the truth," I whispered. We drank. The whiskey burned, going down a hot, purifying fire that warmed my cold chest. I looked around the empty office one last time. I knew I would never come back here. I knew my life had changed forever, but standing there in the silence with a friend, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of the quiet. The storm was over, and I was still standing. The whiskey Elijah poured into the crystal glasses didn't look like much. It was a cheap amber liquid from a bottle with a peeling label, the kind of stuff you buy when you want to forget, not when you want to celebrate. But as I took the glass from his hand and felt the weight of it against my calloused palm, I knew it was the finest drink I would ever taste. We sat there, 2 old men in a high-rise office that had just been stripped of its illusions. The sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the Persian rug where my son had knelt and begged. The city lights were flickering on below us, a sea of diamonds that looked beautiful from a distance but cold when you got too close. I took a sip. The liquid burned its way down a harsh, fiery trail that settled in my stomach like a hot coal. I welcomed the burn. It made me feel alive. It reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, even though a part of me had just died. I looked at Elijah. He had taken off his ragged coat and draped it over the back of the velvet chair. Without it, he looked smaller, more fragile, but his eyes were still bright with that ancient intelligence. He swirled his drink, watching the vortex of liquid with a distant expression. "It is quiet now," he said softly. "Too quiet," I replied. My voice sounded loud in the empty room. "It is the kind of quiet you hear after a funeral." Elijah nodded slowly. "In a way, it was a funeral, Otis. We just buried a lie. And burying lies is heavy work." I leaned back in the sofa, closing my eyes. I could still see Dante's face as they dragged him away. I could still hear his screams. "Daddy, help me." The guilt washed over me, a tidal wave of regret that threatened to pull me under. I failed him. "Elijah," I whispered. "I failed my boy." Elijah didn't interrupt. He just took a sip of his drink and waited. I loved him too much. I continued, my voice trembling. That was my sin. I loved him so much that I didn't let him grow. When he fell, I picked him up. When he broke something, I fixed it. When he wanted something, I bought it, even if I had to starve. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was giving him the life I never had. But I wasn't giving him a life. I was stealing his character. I created a world where actions didn't have consequences. And now he is going to prison because I didn't teach him how to be a man. I opened my eyes and looked at my hands. These hands that had fought fires and built houses felt useless now. They couldn't fix this. "It is my fault," I said. "If the fruit is rotten, you have to blame the root." Elijah set his glass down on the table with a sharp click. He turned to me, and for the first time his face was stern. "Stop that," he commanded. "Stop that right now." I looked at him, surprised by the steel in his voice. "You are a firefighter, Otis," Elijah said, leaning forward. "If a house burns down because of faulty wiring, do you blame the foundation? No. You blame the spark. You blame the fuel." He pointed a finger at me. "You gave that boy good soil. You gave him love. You gave him discipline. You gave him an education. You planted him in the sun. But a tree does not just grow from the soil, Otis. It grows from the air it breathes. And your son, he chose to breathe toxic air. He chose the wind of greed. He chose the wind of vanity. That isn't on you." Elijah picked up his glass again and looked through the amber liquid at the city skyline. "A leaning tree isn't always the fault of the earth," he said softly. "Sometimes the wind is just too strong and the wood is too weak. The important thing isn't why it leaned. The important thing is that today you dared to do what no father wants to do. You chopped it down before it could fall on the house and kill everyone inside. You saved him, Otis. You saved him from becoming a monster permanently. Prison will be hard, but it might be the trellis he needs to finally grow straight." I listened to his words, trying to let them sink in, trying to let them heal the raw wound in my heart. But it was hard. The image of Dante in handcuffs was burned into my retinas. "How do you know?" I asked quietly. "How do you know so much about falling trees, Elijah? You are a billionaire. You built an empire. What do you know about losing a son?" Elijah went still. The glass froze halfway to his lips. A shadow passed over his face, a look of pain so deep and so old that it made my own grief feel fresh and shallow. He lowered the glass slowly and stared into the dark corner of the room. "Because I didn't chop mine down," he whispered. The room seemed to get colder. "I had a son too," Elijah said, his voice raspy with a memory he rarely touched. "His name was Marcus. He was bright, brighter than me. He could play the piano like an angel. But he had a hunger in him, Otis. A hunger for feeling, a hunger for escape." Elijah took a shaky breath. "I gave him everything, just like you. Cars, money, access. When he got into trouble, I hired the best lawyers. When he got arrested for possession, I paid the judges. I made it go away. I thought I was protecting him. I thought I was loving him." He looked at me and his eyes were swimming with tears. "I enabled him, Otis. I paved the road to his destruction with my own gold. I didn't let him face the consequences, and because I kept saving him, he kept falling deeper." Elijah paused, his hand gripping the glass so hard his knuckles turned white. 10 years ago I got a call. It wasn't from a lawyer, it was from the coroner. They found him in a hotel room alone, overdose. He was 32 years old, the same age as your Dante. I stared at him. The great Elijah Stone, the man who owned the city, sitting there with a broken heart just like mine. "I would give every building I own," Elijah said, a tear rolling down his cheek into his beard. "I would give every dollar in my bank account just to go back to the day he was arrested the first time. I would give it all to have the courage you showed today, to let him go to jail, to let him hit rock bottom. Because rock bottom is solid ground, Otis. You can build on rock bottom, but you can't build on a grave." He wiped his face with the back of his hand and looked at me with a fierce intensity. "You didn't fail your son, Otis. You gave him the one chance I was too cowardly to give mine. You gave him his life back. It doesn't feel like it now. It feels like hell. But one day he might thank you. And even if he doesn't, you can sleep at night knowing you didn't bury him." We sat in silence for a long time, two fathers bound by the love of our sons and the pain of our choices. The whiskey bottle sat between us, a silent witness to our confession. I reached out and poured another splash into his glass and then into mine. "To Marcus," I said, raising my glass. Elijah smiled a sad, broken smile. "To Dante," he replied. We drank, and as the warmth spread through my chest, I felt a shifting inside me. The guilt didn't vanish, but it stopped crushing me. I realized that Elijah was right. I had done the only thing I could do. I had stopped the fire. Elijah set his empty glass down and cleared his throat. He sat up straighter, shaking off the ghost of his past. He looked at me with a new glint in his eye, a spark of the business tycoon returning. "Now," he said briskly, "we have spent enough time looking backward. It is time to look forward." "Forward," I scoffed. I am 72 years old, Elijah. I have a pension, a broken heart, and an empty house. There is no forward. There is just waiting for the end." Elijah shook his head. "That is where you are wrong. You think your life is over because your son is gone, but I think your life is just beginning. You have something, Otis, something I haven't seen in this city for a long time. You have a spine. You stood up to greed when it was wearing the face of your own flesh and blood. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" He reached into his canvas bag again, but this time he didn't pull out whiskey or a handkerchief. He pulled out a business card. It was simple, heavy black cardstock with gold lettering. "I have a proposition for you," Elijah said, sliding the card across the polished mahogany table. I looked at it. It didn't have a title, just his name and a private number. "I am reopening the charitable division of King Holdings," Elijah said, "but I am renaming it. It is going to be the Marcus Stone Foundation. Our mission is legal defense for the elderly. We protect people like Mrs. Higgins and Mr. Miller. We fight against predatory lenders, abusive nursing homes, and greedy children who think their inheritance is more important than their parents' dignity." He looked at me, his hazel eyes locking onto mine. I have enough lawyers, Otis. I have enough sharks in suits who know the law but don't know right from wrong. I need a conscience. I need someone who can sit across from a crying widow and tell her the truth. I need someone who can look a bully in the eye and not blink. I need a man who has walked through the fire. I stared at him. You want to hire me? I asked incredulously. I am a retired firefighter. I don't know anything about the law. You know justice, Elijah corrected me. And you know pain. That is all the qualification I need. Come work with me, Otis. Be my eyes. Be my ears. Help me clean up the mess men like Dante leave behind. I looked at the card. I looked at the city lights. I thought about the empty days stretching out before me, and then I thought about the feeling I had on the bus when I stood up for Elijah, the feeling of purpose. I picked up the card. It felt heavy. It felt like a badge. I don't wear suits, I said gruffly. Elijah laughed, a sound that was genuine and warm. Good, because I am planning to burn this one as soon as I get home. We shook hands, and in that handshake I felt the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter not written in the shadow of my son, but written in the light of my own integrity. The bus ride was over, but the journey was just getting started. The whiskey was gone, but the warmth remained. It settled in my chest right next to the strange new feeling of emptiness where my son used to be. I spun the empty crystal glass on the mahogany table, watching the light fracture through the facets. For the first time all day, I wasn't waiting for the next blow to fall. I wasn't waiting for an insult from Brittany or a demand from Dante. I was just sitting in the quiet aftermath of a hurricane. Elijah Stone leaned back in the velvet chair. He looked at me with a gaze that felt like it was measuring my soul for a suit. He didn't look like a man who had just sent his CEO to prison. He looked like a man who was finally ready to get to work. He tapped the business card he had slid across the table. It was a simple piece of cardstock, black with gold lettering, but it felt heavier than the marble slab in the lobby. Read it again, Otis, Elijah said softly. I picked it up. Special Advisor, the Marcus Stone Foundation. I don't understand, I said, looking up at him. I know you said you want to help old folks. I know you want to fight the wolves. But what does a special advisor do? I am not a lawyer, Elijah. I don't know a tort from a tortellini. I can't write a brief. I type with 2 fingers. Elijah chuckled, a low, rumbling sound. I have 500 lawyers in this building, Otis. I have floors full of young men and women who can recite the civil code backward in their sleep. They are brilliant. They are sharp. They are hungry. But they have a fatal flaw. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. They are blind. Blind, I asked. They see the law, but they don't see the people, Elijah said. When a 70-year-old woman comes in here crying because her nephew made her sign a deed she didn't understand, these young lawyers look at the paper. They look at the signature. They say, well, legally it is binding. They don't see the fear in her eyes. They don't hear the hesitation in her voice. They don't smell the coercion. They miss the human element because they have spent their whole lives buried in books. Elijah pointed a finger at me. But you, Otis, you spent 30 years walking into burning buildings. You spent 30 years looking at people on the worst days of their lives. You know what fear smells like. You know what a lie sounds like. You know the look in a man's eye when he is trying to hide something. I thought about the fires. I thought about the arsonists I had caught, not because of evidence, but because of a gut feeling. I thought about the way I knew Dante was lying before he even opened his mouth. I need a human lie detector, Elijah continued. I need someone to sit in those meetings. I need someone to listen to the families when they come in claiming they just want what is best for Grandma. I need you to look them in the eye and tell me if they are telling the truth or if they are just waiting for the inheritance check. You are going to be my gatekeeper, Otis. You are going to be the shield. I looked down at my hands. They were rough, scarred hands, hands that had held hoses and axes, hands that had held my dying wife. I am just a retired firefighter, I whispered. I barely finished high school. I am 72 years old. I am tired, Elijah. Maybe it is time for me to just go sit on a porch somewhere and wait for the end. Elijah slammed his hand on the table. It wasn't an angry slam, it was a wake-up call. Don't you dare, he said, his voice rising. Don't you dare talk about the end. Look at me, Otis. I am 75. Do I look like I am finished? He stood up and walked to the window, gesturing at the sprawling city below. This world is full of Dantes, he said grimly. It is full of Brittany's. It is full of people who think that gray hair means weak-minded. They think that because we walk slow, we don't think fast. They are eating our generation alive, Otis. They are stealing our homes, our pensions, and our dignity, and they are doing it with a smile and a hug. He turned back to me, his silhouette framed by the dying light of the sun. I can't fight them alone. I need a partner. I need a man who was willing to lose his own son to do the right thing. That kind of integrity is rare, Otis. It is clearer than diamond and harder than steel. You say you aren't qualified because you don't have a degree from Harvard. Elijah walked over to me and poked me hard in the chest right over my heart. I can buy a Harvard degree for $50,000 a year, he said. I can hire 1,000 Ivy League graduates tomorrow. But I cannot buy this. I cannot buy what you have inside here. I cannot buy the courage it took to stand up in this office today and say no. He softened his voice. You have a PhD in hard knocks, Otis. You have a doctorate in survival. That is what I need. I am offering you a salary double what your pension pays. I am offering you an office. I am offering you a purpose. But most of all, I am offering you a chance to make sure that what happened to you today never happens to anyone else. I sat there, letting his words wash over me. I thought about the lady on the bus, the one counting pennies. I thought about the veterans I knew who had lost their homes to predatory lenders. I thought about Bessie and how she used to say, Otis, you were born to save people. I had thought my saving days were over when I hung up my helmet. I thought my purpose had died with my wife. But looking at Elijah, I felt a spark. A tiny ember in the ashes of my soul fanned into a flame. I wouldn't have to wear a suit, would I? I asked, a small smile tugging at the corner of my mouth. Elijah grinned. You can wear your turnout gear for all I care. Just bring your gut instincts. I took a deep breath. The air in the penthouse felt cleaner now. Okay, I said. I accepted the offer. Okay, Elijah. I am in. We shook hands. His grip was strong. It was a pact between two warriors who had found each other on the battlefield. Now, Elijah said, clapping his hands together, let's get you out of here. I don't think you want to spend another minute in this mausoleum. He pressed a button on the intercom. Henderson, send a crew up here, and bring a truck. Mr. King is moving out. The move was swift. I didn't have much. My life in that penthouse had been a suitcase life, temporary and unrooted. I packed my few shirts, my old photographs of Bessie, and the Bible she had given me on our wedding day. I left the expensive suits Dante had bought me. I left the gold watch he had given me as a bribe. I left everything that smelled of his money. There was only one thing I needed to take. Down in the basement in the recycling room where this nightmare had started, sat the leather wingback chair. I told Elijah about it. I told him how Brittany had thrown it out. Elijah didn't say a word. He just marched down to the basement with me, flanked by 2 security guards. When we got there, the chair was still on its side next to the dumpster, looking forlorn and abandoned. Elijah looked at the guards. Pick it up, he ordered. Gently. That is a throne, not a chair. The guards lifted it with reverence. They carried it to the freight elevator, then out to the loading dock where a black SUV was waiting. I walked over to the chair. I ran my hand along the worn leather. It was cold, but it felt alive. It felt like Bessie was still there waiting for me. We are going home, girl, I whispered. We are going back to the real world. I turned to Elijah. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me yet. Otis? Elijah winked. You start Monday, and I am a tough boss. I expect you to be on the bus at 7 sharp. I laughed. It felt good to laugh. It felt like something broken inside me was knitting back together. I gathered my small bag of belongings. I put on my old coat, the one that smelled of wood smoke and rain. I put on my comfortable shoes, the ones with the scuff marks. I walked through the lobby of the Union Tower one last time. The sun had set, and the lobby was glowing with artificial light. The marble floors were still polished. The brass was still shining. But it didn't intimidate me anymore. I saw the security guard, the young one with the buzz cut who had tried to stop us earlier. He saw me coming. He saw Elijah walking beside me. He saw the way the head of security held the door for us. The young guard went pale. He stood up straight and snapped a clumsy salute. Good evening, Mr. King, he stammered. Have a good night, sir. I stopped. I looked at him. I could have reported him. I could have had him fired. But I looked at his fear, and I remembered Dante. I remembered that cruelty often comes from insecurity. Son, I said, my voice calm and authoritative. When you see a man in a dirty coat next time, don't look at his shoes. Look at his eyes. Shoes can be bought. Eyes tell the story. I didn't wait for his answer. I walked past him. I walked toward the revolving doors, the same doors I had entered as a beggar, as a nuisance, as a father about to be betrayed. But I wasn't leaving as a victim. I pushed the glass door. It spun smoothly. The cool evening air hit my face, carrying the sounds of the city, the sirens, the traffic, the life. I stepped out onto the sidewalk. I took a deep breath of the exhaust fumes and the street food. It smelled like freedom. I looked up at the tower one last time. I looked at the 42nd floor where the lights were still on, where the police were cataloging the ruins of my son's ambition. Goodbye, Dante, I whispered. I hope you find yourself in the dark. I turned my collar up against the wind. I adjusted my hat. I didn't look back. I walked to the curb where Elijah's car was waiting to take me and my chair back to my little rental house. I walked with a limp, but my head was high. My spine was straight. I was Otis King. I was a father. I was a firefighter. And now I was a man with a purpose. The bus number 42 roared past in the street, its brakes squealing. I smiled at it. I had missed the bus this morning, but I had caught my life. Dưới đây là phần cuối cùng. Phần 17 của kịch bản được viết chi tiết bằng tiếng Anh tuân thủ đúng yêu cầu về giọng văn cảm xúc và định dạng không tiêu đề để phù hợp với việc đọc voice-over. The coffee pot in the corner of the office on 4th Street was always brewing. It was a cheap machine that hissed and sputtered, but the smell was the best thing in the world. It smelled like safety. It smelled like a place where you could sit down, catch your breath, and tell the truth without looking over your shoulder. I sat behind a desk that wasn't made of imported mahogany. It was a sturdy oak desk bought secondhand with scratches on the surface that told stories of hard work. I ran my hand over the wood, feeling the texture. It matched my hands. I was wearing the navy blue vest that Elijah insisted was the uniform of a special advisor, but underneath the desk, out of sight, I was wearing my old, comfortable shoes. The ones with the scuff marks. The ones that had walked through fire. I kept them to remind myself that no matter how high up you get, you still have to walk on the ground. Across from me sat Mrs. Higgins. She was 80 years old with hands that shook like dry leaves in the wind. She was clutching a plastic bag full of letters, crying softly into a tissue I had given her. He said it was a loan. Mr. King, she whispered, wiping her eyes. My grandson. He said he needed the deed to the farm just to show the bank for a loan. He said he would bring it back the next day. That was 6 months ago. Now there are surveyors on my land. They say they are building condos. They say I have 30 days to leave. I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes. It was the same fear I had seen in the mirror a year ago. The fear of being erased by someone you loved. The fear of realizing that your blood didn't view you as a person, but as a resource to be mined. I leaned forward. I didn't look at the papers. I looked at her. Mrs. Higgins, I said, and my voice was calm and steady. The voice of a man who has seen the worst and survived. You are not going anywhere. You are not leaving your farm. But the papers, she stammered. He has the papers. Papers are just wood pulp and ink, I said. They burn, but the truth doesn't burn. I picked up the phone on my desk. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was the number for the heavy hitters upstairs, the sharks in suits that Elijah employed. But this time they weren't swimming for blood. They were swimming for us. David, I said into the receiver. This is Otis. I have Mrs. Higgins here. We have a case of deed fraud involving a vulnerable senior. I want a stay of execution on that development filed by noon. And I want a forensic audit on the grandson's accounts. Yes, the full weight of the firm. Thank you. I hung up. I looked back at Mrs. Higgins. She had stopped crying. She was looking at me with something that looked like hope. Is it that easy? She asked. No, ma'am, I smiled. It isn't easy. It is war. But you are not fighting it alone anymore. You have an army now, and I am the general. She reached across the desk and took my hand. Her skin was paper thin, but her grip was surprisingly strong. Thank you, Mr. King. They told me you were the one to see. They said you were the man who doesn't blink. I squeezed her hand. I don't blink, Mrs. Higgins, because I have seen what happens when you close your eyes. As she gathered her things and left, walking a little taller than when she entered, the bell above the door jingled. A man walked in. He was wearing a floppy bucket hat that had seen better days, a fishing vest covered in pockets, and carrying 2 fishing rods. He looked like he should be sitting on a pier in the bayou, not walking into a legal foundation in the city. "Ready to go, counselor?" the man asked, his hazel eyes twinkling. "The catfish aren't going to catch themselves." I laughed. I stood up, stretching my back. My arthritis was better these days. Maybe it was the medicine, or maybe it was just the feeling of being useful. "I am not a counselor, Elijah," I said, grabbing my coat. "I am just a guy with a desk and a loud voice." Elijah Stone, the billionaire who could buy the whole block, smiled at me. He walked over and sat on the edge of my desk, ignoring the stack of files. "How is the caseload?" he asked. "Heavy," I admitted. "There are a lot of Dantes out there, Elijah. More than I thought." Elijah nodded, his face growing serious for a moment. "That is why we are here, Otis, to balance the scales. Speaking of, have you heard from him?" The room went quiet. The sound of the traffic outside seemed to fade away. I looked at the small drawer on the right side of my desk. I opened it slowly. Inside, sitting alone on the wood, was a letter. The envelope was white and crisp. The return address was stamped in red ink. State Correctional Facility. Inmate 459220. King Dante. It had arrived 3 days ago. It was still sealed. I reached in and touched the corner of the envelope. "He is learning carpentry," I said softly. "His lawyer told me. He is working in the wood shop. He is making chairs." Elijah raised an eyebrow. "Chairs? That is poetic." "Yeah," I chuckled dryly. "He spent his whole life trying to sit on a throne, and now he is building simple wooden chairs for schools." The lawyer said his hands are covered in calluses. He said Dante cries at night sometimes, but he wakes up and goes to work. "He wrote to you," Elijah said, gesturing to the letter. "I know," I said. "Are you going to open it?" I closed the drawer. I pushed it shut until it clicked. "Not today," I said. "I am not ready, Elijah. I have forgiven him in my heart. I have to. He is my son. But forgiveness is a journey, not a light switch. I need to know that the change is real before I let him back in. I need to know he has found his own solid ground. When he builds a chair that doesn't wobble, then I will read his letter." Elijah nodded respectfully. He understood. He patted my shoulder. "Time takes time, Otis. You planted the seed. Now you have to let the rain do its work. Come on. The river is waiting, and I have a feeling the big ones are biting today." We walked out of the office together. I locked the door, turning the sign to closed. I checked the reflection in the glass. I didn't see a tired old man anymore. I saw a man in a vest who had work to do. We stepped onto the sidewalk. The late afternoon sun was turning the city gold. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of exhaust and roasted nuts. It was the smell of the city I loved. We started walking toward Elijah's truck parked down the block. But as we waited at the crosswalk, a sound made me stop. It was the screech of air brakes, the heavy groan of an engine. I turned my head. A large city bus was pulling up to the curb. It was battered and blue with a streak of dirt along the side. The number on the digital display flashed in bright orange. 42. The doors hissed open. A crowd of people spilled out. Tired nurses in scrubs, construction workers covered in dust, mothers holding crying babies. The invisible people. I watched them. A year ago I had stepped onto that bus feeling like my life was over. I had stepped onto that bus feeling like a piece of trash that had been discarded by my own family. I thought it was a ride to my execution. But as I watched the bus pull away, belching a cloud of dark smoke, I realized the truth. That bus hadn't taken me to a nursing home. It hadn't taken me to a lawyer's office. It had taken me back to myself. It had stripped away the illusions. It had forced me to look at the ugly truth of my son and the beautiful truth of my own strength. It had brought me to Elijah. It had brought me to this corner on 4th Street where I could stand between the wolves and the sheep. Otis Elijah called out from the truck window, "You coming? Or are you going to stand there and admire the public transit?" I smiled, a real deep smile that started in my chest and went all the way to my eyes. "I am coming," I shouted. I looked at the bus one last time as it disappeared around the corner. "Thank you," I whispered. I turned and walked toward the truck. My step was light. My shoes were old, but they were comfortable. They were the shoes of a man who knew exactly where he was going. I climbed into the passenger seat and slammed the door. "Drive, Elijah," I said. "I have got a fish to catch, and tomorrow I have a world to save." Otis King's journey reminds us that dignity isn't defined by the car you drive or the suit you wear, but by the integrity you hold when no one is watching. In a society obsessed with success at any cost, we often forget that our elders are not burdens to be managed, but libraries of wisdom to be cherished. True legacy isn't the inheritance you leave behind, but the values you instill. Sometimes the hardest act of love is allowing those we cherish to face the consequences of their own greed. Justice may take the bus, but it always arrives on time. Otis King's journey teaches us that true dignity is not found in a penthouse view or a designer suit, but in the quiet strength of integrity. In a world that often treats the elderly as expired goods, we must remember that they are the architects of our foundation, not burdens to be discarded. Dante learned too late that you cannot build a lasting legacy on the ruin of those who sacrificed for you. Sometimes the deepest act of parental love is not providing a safety net, but having the courage to let a child hit rock bottom so they can finally learn to stand on solid ground. Justice might move slowly like an old city bus, but it always reaches its destination. If this story touched your heart, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more tales of justice and redemption. And I want to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Otis did the right thing by letting his son go to prison, or should he have saved him one last time? Let me know your thoughts below. See you in the next story.